Fractal Enigma Audio Previews. The concept is simple. We read you the first chunk of a book. Enough to hook you. Enough to wreck you. Enough that by the time we stop, you're pulling out your phone to buy the rest before the outro music fades. Think of it as a dealer's first taste, but the drug is fiction and the side effects are feelings. This week, The Plant Shop Next Door by Aurora North. Here's the setup. Lena inherits her dead grandmother's apartment building. The ground floor is a plant shop run by a woman named Mira, who is loud, chaotic, and talks to her ferns like they're people. They share a wall, a leaky pipe, a greenhouse that smells like jasmine, and a gravitational pull that neither of them asked for and neither of them can resist. She's a locked safe. She's a force of nature. The building is falling apart. So are their boundaries. This one's sapphic, it's spicy, and if you're not careful, it'll make you buy a houseplant at 2 a.m. Chapter 1. Lena.
The building looked smaller than I remembered. That was the thing about leaving somewhere for long enough. Everything shrank. The brick facade that had seemed so grand when I was 8, racing up the stoop to Abuela Rosa's apartment with skinned knees and a backpack full of library books, was just a building now. 3 stories of aging brick and iron fire escapes, wedged between a laundromat and a nail salon on a block that couldn't decide if it was gentrifying or giving up. I stood on the sidewalk with my duffel bag over one shoulder and a coffee going cold in my hand, staring at the front door like it might bite me. 2 years. That's how long I'd been avoiding this. My phone buzzed. A text from the property management company, or rather, the former property management company, since Greg had quit 3 weeks ago via a 2-sentence email that amounted to "Your building is a headache, and I'm too old for this." The text was automated. "Your account has been closed. Thank you for choosing Greenleaf Property Services." "Thanks, Greg," I muttered. "Real helpful." I drained the last of the coffee, tossed the cup in the trash can on the corner, and dug out the key ring Abuela Rosa's lawyer had mailed me 2 years ago. I'd never used it. I'd paid Greg to deal with everything: the tenants, the maintenance, the taxes, the slow accumulation of problems that came with owning a 100-year-old building you didn't ask for and definitely didn't deserve. But Greg was gone, the building was still here, and the pile of shit I'd been ignoring had apparently reached critical mass. I climbed the stoop. The front door stuck. It had always stuck even when I was a kid. You had to lift the handle and push with your hip at the same time. My body remembered the motion before my brain caught up, and something about that muscle memory made my chest tight. The foyer smelled like old wood and lemon cleaner. Someone was keeping it clean at least. The mailboxes lined the wall, 3 units plus the ground floor commercial space. My mailbox, Unit 2, was stuffed so full that envelopes had been shoved through the gap at the top and were sticking out like paper teeth. I pulled the stack free. Bills. Junk mail. A notice from the city about a water main inspection. And then at the bottom, a series of handwritten notes on mismatched paper, torn notebook pages, the back of a flyer, one written on what appeared to be a paper bag. All from the same person. "Hi, Mira Chen from the shop downstairs. Rent's going to be a few days late this month. Sorry. Working on it. Hey again, Mira from Fern Flicker." So a few days turned into a few weeks, and I know that's not great. I can do half now and half next month. Let me know. Or don't. Greg hasn't returned my calls either. Okay, third note, I promise I'm not a deadbeat. The shop had a rough quarter, and I'm catching up. I can offer manual labor in exchange for patience? I'm strong. Deceptively strong. I once carried a 60-pound bag of potting soil up a flight of stairs without stopping. Please don't kick me out. And the last one, written in a different pen, the handwriting a little shakier. Please don't be a dick about this. I stared at that last note for a long moment. Then I folded them all together and shoved them in my back pocket. The stairs creaked as I climbed to the second floor. My apartment, Abuela Rosa's apartment, I still couldn't think of it as mine, was at the top of the first flight. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and the smell hit me like a fist. Not bad. The opposite. Garlic and cilantro, and the faint sweetness of the candles she used to burn on the kitchen windowsill. It had been 2 years and the apartment still smelled like her, as if the walls had absorbed decades of her cooking and her prayers and her stubborn, generous life and refused to let go. I set my bag down and stood in the doorway, hands in my hoodie pockets, and just breathed. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room. Hardwood floors that Abuela Rosa had polished every Saturday morning while listening to boleros on a radio older than me. Her furniture was still here, the heavy wooden dining table she'd brought from her mother's house, the crocheted throws draped over every surface, framed photos on the walls. Me at 6, gap-toothed, holding a sunflower that was taller than I was. Me at 18, graduation cap crooked, Abuela Rosa beaming beside me like she'd personally willed me through high school. The photo next to it, me at 30, at a tech conference in San Francisco, looking like I'd rather be dead than on a panel about back-end architecture. Abuela Rosa had framed that one too, because she framed everything, because she was proud of me even when I gave her nothing to be proud of. I looked away. The apartment was dusty but intact. Greg, for all his faults, had kept the heat on and the pipes from freezing. But the ceiling in the living room told a different story. A brownish water stain spreading from the corner near the balcony, the plaster bubbled and soft-looking. The leak was coming from somewhere. The roof, maybe. Or the pipe junction between floors. I'd have to figure that out. I pulled out my laptop and sat at the dining table, because if I sat on the couch I'd start crying, and I wasn't here to cry. I was here to audit. Greg had left me a shared drive full of files in no particular order: leases, inspection reports, vendor invoices, tenant correspondence. I opened the folder and started sorting. Unit 1, ground floor commercial, Fern Flicker plant shop. Tenant Mira Chen. Lease signed 4 years ago with Abuela Rosa, below market rate even then. The lease was a handshake deal put on paper, simple, generous, full of clauses that favored the tenant because that's who my grandmother was. She'd rather lose money than lose a neighbor. Unit 2, mine. Empty for 2 years. Unit 3, Mrs. Pock. Model tenant. Rent always on time. Had lived here for 12 years. Her file contained exactly 1 maintenance request in that entire span, a request to fix the hallway light in 2019 with a handwritten thank you note after it was resolved. I rubbed my eyes under my glasses. 3 units and a shop. A building that needed a new roof, updated wiring, and probably a full plumbing overhaul. A commercial tenant who was behind on rent and writing me desperate notes on paper bags. A cousin in Phoenix who kept texting me links to commercial real estate listings with messages like, "Just something to think about, and the market is very strong right now, Lena." "Cool," I said to the empty apartment. "This is fine." A sound drifted up from below, music. Something with a beat, a woman's voice, something that sounded like it belonged in a sun-drenched kitchen rather than a plant shop in a city that hadn't seen sun in 3 days. It was a little too loud, leaking up through the floor and the walls like the building itself was humming along. I closed my laptop and walked to the balcony door. The door stuck too. Same trick, lift and push. It swung open and the evening air hit me, cool and damp, carrying the smell of rain and something greener underneath. The balcony was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 chairs, and it overlooked the back of the building where the shop's greenhouse jutted out from the ground floor. The greenhouse was an addition, a glass-roofed structure attached to the shop's back wall, glowing from the inside like a lantern. I leaned on the railing and looked down. Through the greenhouse glass, I could see her. She was moving between the rows of plants with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, checking leaves, adjusting pots, pinching off dead growth with her bare fingers. She was short, 5'4" maybe, with dark curly hair cropped close on the sides and longer on top, pinned back with a clip that was losing its grip. She was wearing a tank top and overalls with one strap hanging down, and her arms were something. Tanned and strong, the kind of defined you got from actual physical work, not a gym. She lifted a ceramic pot that had to weigh 30 pounds and moved it from one shelf to another without pausing her conversation. Because she was talking to the plants. "You're being dramatic," she said to something leafy and drooping. "You got water yesterday. I saw you get water yesterday. Don't look at me like that." She moved to the next one, a tall sculptural thing with wide leaves that fanned out like hands. She touched a leaf gently, almost reverently, then leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear. I watched her crouch to inspect the base of a fern, her overalls pulling tight across her thighs. She stood up and stretched, arms over her head, the tank top riding up to show a strip of soft brown skin above her waistband. She twisted to crack her back and made a sound that was. It was a sound. A satisfied, uninhibited, full-body groan that carried up through the glass and the evening air and hit me somewhere below the sternum. She didn't know she was being watched. She was in her space, in her element, completely unself-conscious, and there was something about that, the ease of it, the way she touched the plants like they were friends, the way she talked to them like they could hear her and she didn't care if that made her crazy, that I couldn't look away from. She turned and the light caught her face. Sharp eyes. A quick, crooked smile directed at a vine that had started climbing the wrong direction. A dimple, just one on her left cheek. "You're going the wrong way, dummy," she told the vine, gently redirecting it with her fingers. "Growth is that way. Toward the light. What are you new?" My hands were gripping the balcony railing. I made myself let go. This was the woman writing me desperate notes about rent. The foliage overlord. The disaster-prone business owner who'd poured her savings into a plant shop and was slowly drowning under a lease my grandmother had written on a prayer and a handshake. She looked up. Not at me, at the sky, checking for clouds, or maybe just breathing. But for a second, from this angle, with the greenhouse light behind her and the plants all around her like a jungle she'd built with her own hands, she looked like something out of a painting I'd walk past in a museum and think about for the rest of the week. I stepped back from the railing, went inside, closed the balcony door, stood in my dead grandmother's apartment, in the building I'd inherited and ignored and didn't deserve, and pressed my palms to my eyes behind my glasses. "Get it together, Ortiz," I said out loud. "You're here to fix a building, not to stare at your tenant." But I could still hear the music. And I could still see her, the arms, the dimple, the strip of skin above her waistband, the way she touched every living thing like it mattered. I sat back down at the dining table, opened my laptop, and stared at the lease for Fern Flicker until the words blurred. Below me, the music played on. Chapter 2. Mira. The calathea were dying, and it was personally offensive. "You were fine yesterday," I said, crouching in front of the display shelf near the window, turning a pot so the drooping leaves caught the light. "You were perky. You were thriving. You were giving main character energy. And now you're doing this?" The calathea did not respond. It continued to wilt, with the theatrical commitment of a Victorian woman who just received bad news by letter. "Ungrateful," I muttered, misting the leaves with the spray bottle I kept clipped to my overalls like a holster. "I gave you distilled water." "Distilled? Do you know how annoying it is to buy distilled water? They put it on the bottom shelf at the grocery store. I have to squat for you." Behind me, the bell above the shop door chimed. "1 second." I called over my shoulder, not looking up. I was mid-diagnosis, checking the soil moisture with my finger, feeling for root compaction, trying to determine if this was a humidity problem or a spite problem. Some plants were just spiteful. I respected it, but I didn't have to like it. "Take your time." I stood up, wiping my hands on my overalls, and turned around. She was standing just inside the door, one hand still on the frame like she wasn't fully committed to entering. Tall, taller than me, which wasn't hard, but she carried it in a way that was all angles. Lean and sharp, like someone had sketched her with clean lines and no wasted strokes. Light brown hair pulled back in a low ponytail that was 2 hours past neat. Wire-rimmed glasses slightly crooked on her nose. A gray hoodie that was at least 2 sizes too big, dark jeans, beat-up Converse that had seen better decades. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. Like someone had dragged her here at gunpoint and she'd accepted her fate but wanted it on record that she was not happy about it. And she was. Okay, she was really pretty. In that completely unfair way where the person clearly wasn't trying, didn't care, and had probably rolled out of bed looking exactly like that. Sharp jaw, brown eyes that were doing something complicated behind those glasses, silver rings on 3 fingers catching the light from the shop window. My brain, which was supposed to be focused on calathea triage and not on cataloging a stranger's bone structure, helpfully supplied, "Oh no." "Hi," I said too brightly, the way I always did when my nervous system decided to betray me. "Welcome to Fern Flicker. Can I help you find something? We've got a sale on Pothos, buy one, get one half off, which honestly is just me trying to clear shelf space because they propagate like they're getting paid for it." She blinked, took a slow look around the shop, the overflowing shelves, the trailing vines hanging from the ceiling, the hand-painted signs. She believed she could photosynthesize, so she did. The community board plastered with flyers for queer book clubs and drag brunches and a lost cat named Spaghetti. "I'm not here to shop," she said. Her voice was low and even and dry enough to cure lumber. "I'm Lena Ortiz. I own the building." My stomach dropped through the floor, through the foundation, directly into the earth's core. "Oh," I said. "Yeah." "Oh shit." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile. The ghost of a smile's distant cousin. That's about the reaction I expected. My brain went into full emergency protocol, which meant my mouth went into overdrive. "Okay. Hi. Hello. I'm Mira, but you know that obviously because I've been leaving you notes like a stalker, which I realize in retrospect was maybe not the most professional approach, but Greg stopped answering my calls and I didn't have your email and I thought about carrier pigeon, but that felt excessive. Mira. And I want you to know that the rent situation is temporary. I have a plan. Well, I have the outline of a plan, which is basically a plan if you squint. Mira." I stopped. Took a breath. My hands were doing the thing they did when I was nervous, gesturing wildly, like I could physically catch the words falling out of my mouth and shove them back in. "Sorry," I said. "I talk a lot when I'm panicking." Which I'm not. Panicking. I'm totally fine. The plants are fine. The rent is fine. Everything is fine. She looked at me for a long beat. I couldn't read her expression. It was somewhere between amused and exhausted, which was honestly a fair response to me on any given day. "I'm not here about the rent," she said. "You're what?" "Not yet." She adjusted her glasses, pushing them up with one finger. "I just got here. I'm trying to get the lay of the land before I start making decisions about anything. Right now, I'm more worried about the leak." "The leak," I repeated. "There's a water stain on my ceiling. It's coming from somewhere, probably the pipe junction behind your greenhouse. Has it been an issue?" "Oh, that leak? The one I'd been managing with a bucket and aggressive denial for the past 4 months because Greg said he'd handle it and then stopped existing as a functional human being." "Define issue," I said carefully. Her eyebrow went up. "Just one." It was devastating. "There's a bucket," I admitted. "In the back room. Behind the shelf with the propagation trays. It's a very efficient bucket. I empty it every day. Sometimes twice." "You've been managing a building leak with a bucket. A very efficient bucket." She closed her eyes for a second, like she was counting to 10 in a language I didn't speak. When she opened them, she said, "Can you show me?" "The bucket?" "The source." "Right. Yes. Obviously. Follow me." I led her through the shop, weaving between shelves and display tables. The space wasn't big, maybe 800 square feet of retail plus the greenhouse addition in the back, but I'd packed every inch of it with life. Plants on every surface, hanging from the ceiling, climbing the walls on trellises I'd built myself. Fairy lights strung between the shelves. The air was warm and humid and smelled like wet earth and the jasmine that bloomed year-round in the greenhouse. I was hyper-aware of her behind me. The sound of her Converse on the tile floor. The way she paused to look at things, not browsing exactly but cataloging. Taking inventory with those quick brown eyes. "That's Gerald," I said, pointing at the massive fiddle-leaf fig by the register. "He's a drama queen. Drops a leaf if you look at him wrong. Very high maintenance. Great conversationalist, though." "You named your plants." "I named all of them." "That's Dolores. She's the pothos by the door. She's basically immortal. She'll outlive us all." "The monstera over there is Frida. She's going through a growth spurt." "And the little cactus on the counter is Steve. Steve doesn't do much, but he's very supportive." She stared at me. I couldn't tell if she thought I was charming or certifiable. Probably both. Most people landed on both. "Through here," I said, pushing open the door to the back room. The back room was chaos, and I'd stopped apologizing for it. One half was storage and workspace, shelves of soil bags, pots, tools, propagation trays under grow lights. The other half was my apartment, such as it was. A narrow bed pushed against the wall, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, and a mini fridge that had stopped working 3 days ago, a bathroom the size of a closet. A curtain hung from a tension rod served as the divider between business and home, which was generous language for both. "You live here?" she asked, and her voice had shifted, quieter, something I couldn't name. "It came with the lease. Rosa, your grandmother, she let me set up back here instead of paying for a separate apartment. It was part of the deal." I shrugged, aiming for casual, landing somewhere around defensive. "It's not glamorous, but it's mine." She looked at the narrow bed, the string of fairy lights I'd tacked around the window, the stack of books on the floor that served as a nightstand, the small framed photo of my parents on the wall. Her expression was unreadable, but her jaw was tight. "The leak," she said after a moment. "Right." I moved to the far wall, where the greenhouse met the main building. "It's behind here. There's a pipe junction, old copper, probably original, and when it rains hard, water gets in around the fitting. It drips down into the greenhouse wall and then—" I pointed up. "Into your apartment." She crouched to inspect the base of the wall, where a dark stain had crept across the baseboard. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, peering into the gap between the greenhouse frame and the brick. Efficient. Focused. Those long fingers braced against the wall, the silver rings catching the light. I watched her hands, and my brain supplied absolutely no useful thoughts whatsoever. "The fitting's corroded," she said, more to herself than to me. "It needs to be replaced, not patched. I'll have to get a plumber in here." She straightened up, brushing dust off her knees. "Has it gotten worse recently?" "Only when it rains." "It's rained 11 of the last 14 days. "Then yes. Significantly worse recently." She almost smiled again. That same ghost, haunting the corner of her mouth before disappearing. I wanted to chase it. I wanted to make her actually smile, a full one with teeth, the kind that changes a face entirely. "Stop it," I told myself. "She's your landlord. She holds the keys to your entire life. This is not the time to develop a thing." "Can I see the greenhouse?" she asked. "Sure." I led her through the connecting door. The greenhouse was my favorite place in the world, 12 by 20 feet of glass and aluminum framing, the roof panels fogged with condensation, every surface holding plants in various stages of growth. Seedling trays on the heated bench. Hanging baskets of ferns dripping water. A jasmine vine climbing the back wall that filled the whole space with a sweetness that made me dizzy on warm days. The humidity hit you like a wall when you walked in. I was used to it, I spent half my life in here, but I watched Lena react, a small intake of breath, her glasses fogging instantly. She pulled them off and cleaned them on her hoodie hem, blinking. Without the glasses, her face was different, softer, more open, her brown eyes wider and a little unfocused. She looked younger. She looked like someone who might, under the right circumstances, be caught off guard. I looked away before she caught me staring. "This is beautiful," she said quietly, and I don't think she meant to say it out loud. "Thank you." My voice came out softer than I intended. This is the heart of the operation. Everything starts here: propagation, rehab, experimentation. I do workshops in here too. Community stuff. She was looking around the way people look at churches or old-growth forests, with a kind of reluctant awe, like they didn't give themselves permission to feel wonder often and weren't sure what to do with it when it showed up uninvited. "Rosa would have loved this," she said, even quieter. Something cracked in my chest. I didn't let it show. She did. She used to come in on Sunday mornings and sit right there. I pointed at the wooden stool in the corner, and drink her coffee and tell me which plants were being lazy. She had opinions. She always had opinions. She told me the jasmine was showing off. Told me to let it know that beauty wasn't a personality. Lena's mouth curved. Not the ghost this time. An actual smile, small, private, a little sad. It transformed her face the way I'd known it would, and my stupid heart threw itself against my ribs like a dog hearing a car pull into the driveway. "You're in so much trouble," I thought. She put her glasses back on, and the armor went back up. "All business. I'll get a plumber out this week. In the meantime, keep using your very efficient bucket." "Copy that." We walked back through the shop toward the front door. She paused at the display near the register, the little succulent shelf where I kept the cute, compact, hard-to-kill varieties. The ones I recommended for beginners, for people who wanted something alive in their space but didn't trust themselves to keep it that way. I pulled a small jade succulent from the shelf and held it out to her. "Here," I said. "For good landlord karma." She looked at the plant, then at me. "I'm not a plant person." "Everyone's a plant person. They just don't know it yet. This one's a jade. Super low maintenance. Water it when the soil's dry. Ignore it the rest of the time. It thrives on neglect." I grinned. "Think of it as a programmer's plant." She reached for the pot. Our fingers overlapped on the terracotta, hers long and cool, mine warm from the greenhouse, and the contact lasted maybe 2 seconds, but I felt it in places that had nothing to do with my hands. Her eyes flicked to mine. Something moved behind the wire-rimmed glasses, surprise maybe. Recognition. The kind of look that said, "I felt that too, and I don't know what to do about it." She pulled the pot gently from my grip. "Thanks. Don't kill it." "No promises." She tucked the succulent against her body with one arm, like it was a kitten or a book she was protecting from rain, and walked out of the shop. The bell chimed behind her. Through the display window, I watched her climb the stoop, disappear inside, and heard the faint sound of her boots on the stairs. I leaned against the counter. Put both hands flat on the reclaimed wood. Breathed. "Okay," I said to Gerald, who didn't care. "She's just the landlord. She's just the person who decides whether I get to keep my shop, my home, and my entire life. That's all she is. There's absolutely no reason to be." I pressed my hand to my sternum where my heart was doing something medically concerning. "This about it." Gerald dropped a leaf. Solidarity or judgment, I couldn't tell. The front door chimed again and Donnie walked in, helmet under one arm, leather jacket open over a tank top that showed the full sleeve of wildflower tattoos on her right arm. She took one look at my face and stopped dead. "Oh no," she said. "It's nothing. You're doing the face." "I'm not doing a face. This is my regular face. This is how my face always looks." Donnie set her helmet on the counter and crossed her arms. She was 3 inches taller than me and approximately 600% more intimidating, which she wielded with the casual precision of someone who knew exactly how scary she looked and enjoyed it. "Mira. Babe. You're flushed, you're fidgeting, and you've got that specific expression that means someone hot just walked in and scrambled your brain like an egg. I've seen it 4 times in the 3 years I've known you, and 3 of those times were when that barista at Grounds and Greens wore the rolled-up sleeves. So, She leaned against the counter. Who was she? My landlord. Danny's eyebrows shot up. The mystery landlord? The one who inherited the building and then ghosted it for 2 years? She didn't ghost it, she had a property manager. Who quit? That part's not ideal, no. So now the landlord is here. In person. And she's hot. I didn't say she was hot. You didn't have to. Your face has been saying it non-stop since I walked in. Donnie gestured at me with one hand. Look at you. You're practically vibrating. I groaned, dropping my forehead to the counter. She's tall, Donnie. She's got these hands. And she wears glasses and she does this thing where she pushes them up with one finger and it's a whole situation. She's your landlord. I know. She controls your rent. I know. She could literally evict you. Could you stop being practical for 1 second and let me have a crisis in peace? Donnie was quiet for a moment, which was generous for her. Then what's the vibe? Is she corporate? Is she going to gut the building and turn it into luxury condos? I thought about it. Really thought about it, past the sharp jaw and the silver rings and the way her fingers had felt against mine on the terracotta pot. No, I said slowly. She reminded me of the building. A little worn. A little neglected. Like she hasn't been taking care of herself and doesn't know where to start. I paused. She smiled when I told her about Rosa. Just once. But it was real. Donnie watched me with the expression she reserved for moments when she wanted to say something protective, but knew I wouldn't listen. Be careful, she said finally. You have a pattern. I don't have a pattern. You find wounded things and pour yourself into fixing them. That's literally your entire business model. She gestured around the shop. You do it with plants, you do it with stray cats, and you do it with women. And the women never go as well as the plants. Basil turned out fine, I said, referring to my cat, who was technically a stray I'd found behind the dumpster at 3 months old and was now a fully grown orange nightmare with no respect for boundaries or breakable objects. I wasn't talking about Basil. She was talking about Val. We both knew it. I didn't want to go there, not tonight, not with the phantom warmth of Lena's fingers still lingering on my skin. I hear you, I said, straightening up. Landlord. Professional relationship. Boundaries. I've got it. You absolutely do not have it. I have the general concept of it. That's what you said about double-entry bookkeeping, and I ended up doing your taxes. And you did a beautiful job. I really think you have a gift. Donnie shook her head, but she was fighting a smile. I've got to prep for my 6 o'clock appointment. You good to close up? Always. She grabbed her helmet and paused at the door. For the record, the hands and glasses thing? I get it. That's a type. It's a dangerous type, but I get it. Goodbye, Donnie. Just saying. Goodbye, Donnie. The bell chimed as she left, and I was alone in the shop with the plants and the fairy lights and the humid warmth of the greenhouse bleeding through the back room door. I turned the sign to closed and started the end-of-day routine. Watering. Checking the propagation trays. Adjusting the grow lights. Sweeping the floor. The physical rhythm of it usually calmed me down. It was meditation, mantra, prayer, all rolled into the simple act of caring for something that depended on me. Tonight it wasn't working. I kept thinking about her face when she saw the greenhouse. The quiet way she'd said this is beautiful, like the words escaped before she could catch them. The way she'd touched the succulent pot, carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something she hadn't even started caring about yet. I thought about her smile. The real one, the one she'd given me when I told her about Rosa. How it made her look like a completely different person, someone who'd once been soft and hadn't figured out how to get back there. And I thought about her hands. God, her hands? Those long fingers and silver rings and the way they'd overlapped with mine, cool against warm, and how 2 seconds of contact had sent a current straight through me that I was still feeling an hour later, low and persistent, like a hum in the walls. I locked the front door, pulled the curtain across the back room, sat on my narrow bed in the space that was mine only because a kind old woman had decided I was worth a chance, and a granddaughter I'd just met now held that chance in her long, ring-covered fingers. Basil jumped onto the bed and head-butted my chin. I scratched behind his ears and he purred like a broken motor, orange and warm and completely indifferent to my emotional state. "I'm in trouble, Ba," I whispered. He purred louder. Somewhere above me, through the ceiling, I heard the faint sound of boots on hardwood. Lena, pacing her grandmother's apartment, probably staring at spreadsheets and water stains and trying to make sense of the mess she'd inherited. I lay back on the bed and stared at the greenhouse glass, where condensation caught the fairy lights and turned them into blurred stars. "Be careful," Donnie had said. I was going to try. I was almost certainly going to fail. Chapter 3. Lena. It rained for 3 days straight. Not the polite, cinematic kind of rain that taps against windows and makes you want to read a book. The angry kind. The kind that turned the gutters into rivers and the sky into a ceiling of unbroken gray and made every pipe in a 100-year-old building groan like it was begging for mercy. By Thursday night, the water stain on my living room ceiling had graduated from concerning to actively hostile. The plaster was soft to the touch, the brown ring spreading like a bruise, and at 9:47 p.m., while I was 3 hours deep into a back-end refactor and running on coffee in spite, a fat droplet of water landed on my keyboard. Then another. Then a thin, steady stream that hit the E key and sent a cascade of E across my terminal. "Fuck," I said with great precision. I grabbed a pot from under the kitchen sink and positioned it under the drip, then stood back and watched the water hit the metal with a steady plink, plink, plink that was going to drive me out of my mind within the hour. The plumber couldn't come until Monday. I'd called 3 others. One laughed, one quoted me a price that would require selling a kidney, and one just said, "Old building," and hung up. The fitting behind the greenhouse wall was the source. I knew that from my inspection 3 days ago, but the rain was making it worse, pushing water through every weak point in the junction. I could try a temporary fix. I had basic tools. Abuela Rosa's toolbox was still in the hall closet because of course it was, because she'd been the kind of woman who owned a socket wrench set and knew how to use it. I could at least tighten the fitting, maybe wrap it, buy us a few days until the plumber showed. But the fitting was behind the greenhouse wall, which meant going downstairs, which meant seeing Mira. I'd been avoiding Mira. Not aggressively, not obviously, just strategically. I'd taken to using the front entrance instead of the back stairs. I timed my trips to the mailbox for when the shop was busiest, so she'd be occupied with customers. When I heard her music drifting up through the floor, I put on headphones. When I caught myself looking out the balcony door toward the greenhouse, I closed the blinds. It wasn't working. I could feel her through the building like a pulse, the vibration of her music, the faint scent of soil and jasmine that crept up the stairwell, the sound of her voice when she talked to customers, or to her plants, or to that orange cat that seemed to exist solely to knock things off shelves. 3 days of strategic avoidance, and I could still feel exactly where her fingers had touched mine on that terracotta pot. I picked up my phone, stared at the text thread I'd started when she gave me her number for building maintenance coordination. 3 messages, all mine, all about the plumber. Hers were longer, chatty, full of exclamation points and plant emojis, and once, inexplicably, a gif of a cactus wearing sunglasses. I typed, "The leak is getting worse. I need to come down and look at the source. Can I access the back room?" 3 dots appeared immediately. She was awake. "Doors open. Bring snacks." I stared at the message. Then I put on shoes, grabbed the toolbox and a bag of pretzels from the kitchen, and went downstairs before I could talk myself out of it. The shop was dark, closed for hours, but the greenhouse glowed through the backroom doorway like a nightlight. I knocked on the back entrance, the one that opened directly into Mira's living space, and heard a muffled, "It's open," followed by a crash and a creative string of profanity. I opened the door. Mira was standing in the middle of her backroom apartment, barefoot, in an oversized t-shirt that hung to mid-thigh and a pair of boxers covered in tiny cartoon succulents. Her hair was damp, recently showered, and sticking up in about 6 different directions. She was holding a mop in one hand and glaring at a puddle on the floor near the greenhouse wall. "Hi," she said brightly, as if she hadn't just been swearing at standing water. "Welcome to my flooding. Please enjoy the ambiance." I looked at the puddle. Then at the bucket she'd mentioned, a big orange Home Depot bucket positioned under the worst of the drip, already half full. Then at the towels she'd rolled up against the base of the wall like sandbags. "How long has it been this bad?" I asked. "Define bad." "Mira." "Since about 6 o'clock. But it's fine. I have a system." She gestured at the bucket and towel arrangement with the mop like a game show host presenting a prize. "It's very sophisticated. I call it the Mira Chen Flood Mitigation Protocol. Patent pending." I set the toolbox down and crouched by the wall. The water was seeping in faster than I'd expected. Not a drip anymore, but a slow, steady weep through the compromised pipe junction. I could hear it behind the wall, the groan and trickle of water finding paths through old copper and crumbling mortar. "I need to get behind the greenhouse panel to reach the fitting," I said. "Can we pull this shelf out?" "Yeah, hang on." We worked together to move the heavy steel shelving unit that stood against the shared wall. It was loaded with propagation trays, bags of perlite, and about 40 small pots in various stages of sprouting. Mira grabbed one end, I grabbed the other, and we shuffled it forward, our movements awkward and uncoordinated, bumping into each other and the narrow bed and the kitchenette counter. "Left, no, my left, okay, your left was right, wait, that doesn't just..." "Mira, just push." "I'm pushing. It's heavy. I'm strong, but I'm also 5'4" and operating on 1 meal and 2 energy drinks." We got the shelf clear and I could see the access panel behind it, a square of removable drywall that opened into the gap between the greenhouse frame and the main building wall. I pried it off with a flathead screwdriver and shone my phone flashlight into the cavity. The pipe junction was right there, 2 inches of corroded copper where the main feed split to serve the greenhouse's water line. The fitting was weeping at the thread, a thin but persistent stream of water that ran down the pipe and pooled on the sill plate before soaking into the wall. "I can tighten the fitting and wrap it with plumber's tape," I said, leaning in. "It won't hold forever, but it'll slow it down until Monday." "You know how to do that?" "My grandmother taught me. She said every woman should know how to fix a pipe and throw a punch. She was very specific about the order." Mira laughed, a real one surprised out of her. It bounced off the greenhouse glass and filled the small space with warmth that had nothing to do with the humidity. I reached into the cavity with the wrench. The angle was bad. The fitting was about 2 feet in and slightly above my reach, which meant I had to lean in up to my shoulder, bracing my other hand against the inside of the wall for balance. Water dripped onto my forearm, cold and insistent. "Can you hold the light?" I asked, handing my phone back without looking. Mira moved in behind me to take it. The space between the shelf and the wall was narrow, maybe 3 feet, and she had to stand close. Very close. Her shoulder pressed against my back. I could feel the heat of her through my hoodie, the brush of her breath near my ear as she angled the flashlight over my shoulder. "Can you see it?" she asked. Her voice was right there, low and close, and something about the acoustics of the tiny space made it feel like she was speaking directly into my nervous system. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, I've got it." I fitted the wrench over the coupling nut and started to turn. It resisted, decades of corrosion fighting me, and I had to brace harder, my body tensing with the effort. Behind me, Mira shifted to give me more room, but in the narrow space, that just pressed her closer. Her hip against my lower back. Her chest against my shoulder blade. The soft cotton of her t-shirt warm from her skin. Sorry, she murmured. Tight quarters. It's fine. It was not fine. Every nerve ending in my body had recalibrated to the exact points where her body touched mine. The wrench turned in my hand and I couldn't feel it, couldn't feel anything except the line of heat along my back where Mira Chen was pressed against me in her cartoon succulent boxers, smelling like shampoo and greenhouse, and something underneath that was just her, warm and clean and faintly sweet. The fitting gave. I tightened it a quarter turn, then another, until the weeping slowed to an occasional bead of water. Close enough. I pulled the plumber's tape from the toolbox. Mira had to lean back to give me room, and I immediately missed the warmth, which was a problem I was going to deal with never, and wrapped the fitting tight, 3 layers, pressing the tape into the threads. That should hold, I said, pulling my arm out of the wall. My sleeve was soaked, my forearm cold and wet, and there was a smear of copper residue across my wrist. I turned around. Mira was right there. Inches away. Still holding my phone, the flashlight casting her face in sharp upward angles, the line of her jaw, the curve of her mouth, those dark eyes that held too much light for the small space. Her hair was drying into curls that fell across her forehead. The oversized t-shirt had slipped off one shoulder, showing the strap of a sports bra and the smooth brown skin of her collarbone. She was looking at my forearm. At the wet sleeve pushed up to my elbow, the smear of green and copper, the tendons and veins visible under the skin. You've got. She reached out and swiped her thumb across the inside of my wrist, wiping away a streak of grime. Her touch was light, matter of fact, and it sent a jolt through me so sharp my breath caught audibly in the quiet room. She heard it. I saw the moment she registered the sound, her thumb stilling on my wrist, her eyes lifting to mine. We stood there. The greenhouse hummed behind us, the dehumidifier cycling, water dripping somewhere, the faint rustle of leaves in the ventilation current. Rain hammered the glass roof above. My phone light between us, making everything too bright and too close. Her thumb was still on my wrist. I could feel my own pulse under her touch, and I knew she could feel it too, faster than it should have been, tripping over itself like it was trying to get somewhere ahead of the rest of me. Thanks, she said softly. For fixing it. It's not fixed. It's taped. For taping it then. Her thumb moved, not wiping anymore, just tracing. A slow circle on the inside of my wrist, feather-light, that tracked straight up my arm and down my spine and settled somewhere at the base of my stomach like a fist closing. I needed to move. I needed to step back, put distance between us, remember that she was my tenant and I was her landlord, and the power dynamic here was approximately as complex as the plumbing I'd just taped together with $3 worth of PTFE. Mira, I said, and I didn't know what I was going to follow it with. A boundary. A deflection. Something smart and careful and appropriate. But her name in my mouth sounded nothing like any of those things. It sounded like the start of a question I hadn't given myself permission to ask. She pulled her hand back. Took a half step away. The spell cracked, not shattered, cracked like the plaster on my ceiling, still holding but compromised in a way that couldn't be undone. Okay, she said, too brightly, the way she did when she was nervous. Pipes fixed, taped, pipes taped. You should see the greenhouse while you're down here, by the way. It's a whole different vibe at night. Very atmospheric. Very moist. She winced at her own word choice. I watched her face cycle through 6 expressions in 2 seconds. Embarrassment, defiance, amusement, more embarrassment, and something in my chest loosened in a way that felt dangerous. Moist, I repeated. I'm going to need you to not say it like that. Like what? Like it's funny. It is funny. It's a legitimate humidity descriptor. I'm a plant professional. I use the word moist in a professional context all the time. And you're using it professionally right now? Extremely professionally. She was grinning, recovered, that crooked smile with the dimple, and she gestured toward the greenhouse door with the confidence of someone who decided to barrel through their own awkwardness at full speed. Come on. I'll give you the night tour. She pushed through the door and I followed, because apparently that's what I did now. Mira said, follow me, and I followed. The greenhouse at night was a different world. During the day, it was bright and busy, a workspace, a nursery, a place of industry. At night, with the rain drumming the glass roof and the fairy lights strung along the frame casting everything in warm amber, it felt like stepping inside a terrarium. The air was thick and sweet, heavy with moisture and the scent of jasmine and wet earth. Every surface glistened. Water beaded on the glass walls, on the broad leaves, on the petals of flowers that seemed to glow in the low light. "This is where I come when I can't sleep," Mira said, moving between the plant shelves with the ease of someone walking through her own living room. She trailed her fingers along a row of ferns, and the fronds swayed in her wake. "It's like being inside a cloud. A really green, photosynthesis-forward cloud." I stood just inside the doorway, hands in the pockets of my pajama pants, and watched her. She was still barefoot, still in the oversized shirt and the ridiculous boxers, and the humidity was already making her hair curl tighter, the t-shirt cling to her skin in places that... I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at the plants. The plants were very interesting. "You want to see something cool?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. She crouched beside a low shelf and beckoned me over. "Come here. Look at this." I crouched beside her. Our knees touched. Neither of us moved away. "See this?" She pointed to a small plant with reddish-brown leaves nestled in a clay pot. "Calathea rosa picta. Watch." She turned off the fairy lights from a switch on the wall, plunging us into near darkness. Only the faint gray glow of the rainy sky through the glass roof remained. "Wait," she whispered. "Give it a second." I waited. My eyes adjusted. And then I saw it, the calathea's leaves were moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, folding upward like hands pressing together in prayer. "They do that at night," Mira said, her voice hushed with a reverence that made my throat tight. "It's called nyctinasty. The leaves fold up when it gets dark, and open again in the morning. Like they're going to sleep." We were crouched in the dark, close enough that I could feel her breath, watching a plant fold itself to sleep. The rain was loud on the glass above us. Everything smelled like growing things and warm skin and the shampoo in her damp hair. "That's incredible," I said, and meant it. "Right?" She turned to look at me, and in the dark her face was all shadows and the faint gleam of her eyes. "Most people don't get to see it. It happens so slowly that if you're not paying attention, you miss it. You have to be still." "I'm not very good at still." "You're doing pretty well right now." I was motionless, in fact. Because if I moved at all, even an inch, I was going to close the distance between us, and I wasn't sure I could stop at closing it. She turned the fairy lights back on. The greenhouse bloomed back into amber warmth, and I blinked, reorienting. Mira stood up, offered me her hand. I took it, her palm warm and calloused from work, her grip sure, and she pulled me to my feet. She didn't let go immediately. Held my hand for a beat too long, her fingers curled around mine, and looked up at me with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual and failing spectacularly. "So," she said, "you mentioned pretzels?" I laughed. It surprised both of us, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard come out of my own mouth in longer than I wanted to admit. Myra's face lit up like I'd given her something precious, and that reaction hit me harder than the touch or the dark or any of it. "I left them by the door," I said. "Then what are we doing in here?" "Priorities, Ortiz." We went back inside. Sat on her narrow bed because there was nowhere else to sit. The back room didn't have a couch or chairs, just the bed and the kitchenette counter and a lot of plants. Mira cross-legged against the wall, me with my legs stretched out, the bag of pretzels between us and the rain still hammering the building like it had a grudge. We talked. Not about the leak. Not about the rent. About Abuela Rosa, the stories I hadn't told anyone in 2 years because there was no one to tell. How she taught me to solder pipe joints and make a rose con pollo and debug BASIC on a Commodore 64 she'd bought at a garage sale. How she used to say that buildings were like people. They needed attention, they needed care, and they'd tell you what they needed if you listened. Mira told me about the shop. How she'd found the space when it was empty and gutted, walked in off the street, and known instantly that it was hers. How she'd spent 3 months building the shelves herself, watching YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m., driving screws into studs with hands that shook from exhaustion. How on opening day she'd sold exactly one plant, a small pothos, to Mrs. Pock from upstairs, and cried in the greenhouse afterward. Not from sadness. From the overwhelming terror of having something that mattered. "I know that feeling," I said quietly. "I know you do." The pretzels ran out. The rain didn't. We kept talking about code, about plants, about the years we'd each spent running from things we loved because loving them made us vulnerable. The conversation moved the way water moves through old pipes, finding paths, following gravity, going where it needed to go. At some point, I realized I was comfortable. Not just physically, though the bed was surprisingly decent. Comfortable in the way I never was around new people, settled, unguarded, like some anxious algorithm in my brain had finally stopped running. She did that. She made me comfortable without trying, the same way she made plants grow, just by being warm and present and paying attention. It was midnight when I finally stood up to leave. My hoodie was still damp from the pipe repair, and Myra's eyes tracked the way the wet fabric clung to my shoulders and arms before she looked away quickly, studying the ceiling with sudden, intense interest. "Thanks for the pretzel party," she said from the bed, chin on her knees. "And for the pipe taping. Very competent. Very sexy." The word landed in the room like a dropped pot. I mean, her eyes went wide. "Competent." I said competent? The sexy part was, I was making a joke. About the tape. Plumber's tape is inherently... Good night, Mira. Not sexy actually, it's extremely unsexy, which is why it was funny because... Mira. She closed her mouth. Swallowed. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright, and she looked like she wanted the bed to swallow her whole. "Good night, Lena," she said, with the dignity of a woman who just called pipe repair sexy and was choosing to live with that. I walked to the door. Paused with my hand on the frame. "For the record," I said, not turning around. "You don't need to apologize for calling me sexy." I heard her inhale. I didn't look back. I walked through the dark shop, past Gerald and Dolores and Steve, up the stairs, into my apartment. I closed the door and leaned against it and pressed my cold, damp hands to my face. I could still feel her thumb on my wrist. The small, slow circle. The way my pulse had jumped under her touch like a startled animal. I could still smell the greenhouse on my skin, jasmine and wet earth, and the warm, clean scent of her underneath it all. I pushed off the door. Changed into dry clothes. Sat at my laptop and tried to work. The pot on the living room floor went plink. 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 Below me, through the floor, I heard Myra's music come on, something slow and sweet, not the upbeat stuff she played during the day. Night music. The kind of music you played when you were alone and thinking about someone. I put my headphones on. It didn't help. Nothing was going to help. Chapter 4. Mira. I called pipe repair sexy. I called pipe repair sexy to her face, and then tried to uncall it by implying that plumber's tape was inherently humorous, which it is not, and then she said, "You don't need to apologize for calling me sexy." And then she left. Just walked out. Didn't turn around. Delivered that line to the doorframe like it was nothing, like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in my chest cavity, and strolled away from the blast radius without looking back. That was 2 hours ago, and I still hadn't recovered. I was lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, Basil purring on my stomach like a furry space heater, and I was not okay. I was the opposite of okay. I was whatever word existed on the far end of the spectrum from okay, the word they used in nature documentaries when an animal had been tranquilized and was lying on its side with its tongue out, technically alive but not functioning at any meaningful level. The rain was still going. It drummed the greenhouse glass in a rhythm that usually soothed me to sleep, but tonight every sound was amplified. the drip of water, the hum of the dehumidifier, the creak of the building settling, and above it all, the faint presence of Lena through the ceiling. She was still awake. I could hear her, not specific sounds, just the weight of her moving through her apartment. The occasional tap of fingers on a keyboard. The scrape of a chair. She was up there. 20 feet of air and old wood and copper pipe between us. Close enough to hear. Too far to touch. I closed my eyes. The problem with closing my eyes was that my brain immediately pulled up the highlight reel from the past 2 hours and projected it onto the inside of my eyelids in high definition. Lena in my doorway. The toolbox in her hand, the bag of pretzels tucked under her arm, her hair in that low ponytail with strands escaping around her face. Pajama pants and a hoodie and those beat-up Converse, and she'd looked so like the kind of person who showed up. Who heard you had a problem and came downstairs at 10 o'clock at night with tools and snacks without being asked twice. Lena crouching by the wall, all focus, all competence, those long fingers fitting the wrench over the coupling nut like she'd done it 100 times. The way her forearm flexed when she torqued the fitting. The tendons shifting under her skin, the silver rings catching the light, the smear of copper grime across her wrist that I'd reached out and touched without thinking, without permission, without anything resembling self-control. Her pulse under my thumb. Fast. Faster than mine, and mine was already galloping. The sound she'd made when I touched her, that tiny sharp intake of breath. Not quite a gasp. Quieter than that, more involuntary, like her body had answered before her brain could intercept. I'd heard it in the silence of the back room, heard it clearly over the rain and the dripping pipe and the pounding of my own heartbeat, and it had hit me like a physical force, a wave of heat that started in my fingers and rolled straight through to the center of me. I'd wanted to hear it again. I'd wanted to do more than trace her wrist. I'd wanted to press my mouth to the spot where her pulse jumped and feel it against my lips. I hadn't. Obviously. Because I was a functional adult who understood boundaries and power dynamics and the importance of not sexually harassing your landlord during a plumbing emergency. But God, I'd wanted to. And then the greenhouse. The dark. Crouched together in the humid air, watching the calathea fold its leaves, and she'd been so close I could feel the warmth radiating off her body, could smell the rain on her hoodie and the coffee on her breath, and something underneath, clean skin, something faintly woody, something that made me want to press my face into the curve of her neck and just breathe. I'm not very good at still, she'd said. You're doing pretty well right now, I'd said, because apparently my mouth was on a mission to ruin my life, one flirtatious comment at a time. And she'd been still. Perfectly, unnervingly still, the way she got when she was processing something, code or pipe fittings or the woman crouched next to her in the dark. That focused stillness that felt like being held in place by a gaze, like being the only data point that mattered. I opened my eyes. Stared at the ceiling. Basil readjusted on my stomach, kneading my t-shirt with his claws in a way that was painful, but somehow grounding. I'm not doing this, I told him. I'm not lying here like a teenager, replaying every moment, building a whole fantasy around a woman who wrapped my pipe in tape and told me not to apologize for finding it hot. That's not what's happening. Basil purred louder. He didn't believe me either. I picked up my phone. Opened the text thread with Lena. Her last message from before she'd come downstairs, on my way. Found pretzels. 3 words. Completely unremarkable. And yet I'd read them 4 times since she'd left, each time feeling a stupid little flutter under my ribs because she'd found pretzels. She'd gone into her kitchen and looked for something to bring me because I'd asked for snacks, and she'd listened. Val never listened. Val heard me, processed what I said through whatever filter made everything about her, and responded to the version of my words that served her best. I'd ask for space and she'd show up with flowers. I'd say I was struggling and she'd say, everyone struggles, Mira, it's not special. Lena listened. Lena heard me say bring snacks and brought pretzels. Lena heard me say tight quarters and held still so I'd have room. Lena heard me call her sexy, and instead of making me feel stupid about it, she'd given it back to me. turned it around, made it mine to keep, instead of something to be embarrassed about. You don't need to apologize for calling me sexy. I put the phone down, face down, on the far side of the bed where I couldn't reach it without dislodging Basil, which served as a physical barrier between me and the terrible decisions I wanted to make with my thumbs. The rain intensified. A gust of wind rattled the greenhouse glass, and the fairy lights swayed, casting moving shadows across the ceiling. My bed was warm, the sheets soft, and I was wearing nothing under the oversized t-shirt except the succulent boxers, and I was thinking about her hands. Those long, precise fingers. The silver rings she wore, 3 of them on her right hand, plain bands that clicked softly when she moved. Programmer's hands, she'd called them once, like that was a category, but they weren't just that. They were capable hands. Hands that fixed things. Hands that gripped a wrench and turned corroded copper with patient, relentless strength. I thought about those hands on me. Not my wrist. Not a graze of fingers on a terracotta pot. On me. On my skin. Sliding up my thigh under the hem of this stupid t-shirt, those cool fingertips on warm skin, deliberate and unhurried the way she was with everything, with code, with pipes, with the way she looked at me like she was solving an equation and I was the variable she couldn't place. My breath had changed. Slower. Deeper. That conscious, anticipatory breathing that came before I touched myself, the one that meant my body had already decided what was happening, even if my brain was still running the cost-benefit analysis. I moved Basil off my stomach. He protested with a chirp, then resettled at the foot of the bed, curling into a tight orange ball. I pulled the sheet up. Not because anyone could see me. The greenhouse glass was fogged, the back room had no windows, and the curtain between my space and the shop was drawn, but because there was something about being covered that made it feel more like permission. Like a door closing. I slid my hand under the t-shirt. Palm flat on my stomach, fingers spread. My skin was warm from Basil's body heat, from the humid air, from the low fever that had been running through me since Lena Ortiz walked into my shop 3 days ago and looked at me like I was a problem she hadn't expected and didn't know how to solve. I closed my eyes. The greenhouse. Night. Fairy lights off. Just the rain and the dark and the smell of jasmine. We're crouched together, watching the calathea. She's close enough that I can feel her breathing. Her arm brushes mine and neither of us pulls away. But this time, I don't turn the lights back on. This time, I turn toward her in the dark. I find the sleeve of her hoodie, the curve of her shoulder underneath it, the line of her neck. My fingers trace up to her jaw, that sharp, devastating jaw, and I feel her go still. That focused stillness. All of her attention narrowing to the point where my skin meets hers. "Mira," she says in that low, careful voice, and this time she doesn't follow it with something smart or something safe. This time she just says my name and waits. I kiss her. I exhaled. Long. Shaky. My hand moved lower, fingertips tracing beneath the waistband of my boxers, and I let myself sink into it. Her mouth is exactly what I imagined, deliberate. She kisses like she codes, like she fixes pipes, with focus, with attention to detail, with the quiet intensity of someone who does nothing halfway. Her hand comes up to the back of my neck and holds me there, not forceful, just steady, like she's making sure I know she's choosing this. I open my mouth against hers. She takes the invitation. Her tongue slides against mine, slow and searching, and I make a sound into her mouth that I'd be embarrassed about if I had any capacity left for embarrassment, which I don't, because her other hand is on my waist, pulling me closer, and I can feel the length of her body against mine, lean and warm and solid. My fingers found the wet heat between my legs and I gasped, not quietly, a sharp, bitten-off sound that the rain and the dehumidifier couldn't quite cover. I was already swollen, already slick, already so far gone that the first stroke of my fingers against my clit sent a shudder through my whole body. She pushes me back against the potting bench. The edge of it digs into my lower back, and I don't care. Her thigh is between mine, pressing up, and I grind against it without shame, because shame is a concept that no longer applies when Lena Ortiz is looking at me the way she's looking at me right now, like I'm the only line of code that matters, like she's debugging me, finding every hidden function, every secret variable. I was wet. Embarrassingly, desperately wet, my fingers sliding easily, circling my clit in the rhythm I knew, the one that always worked. But tonight everything was heightened. The images sharper, the sensation brighter, every nerve ending tuned to a frequency that had one name. Her hands. Under my shirt. Those long fingers on my ribs, my stomach, tracing the curve of my breast, and I arch into her touch because I need more, I need. Tell me what you want, she says against my throat, her mouth hot on my pulse point, and her voice is rough, rougher than I've ever heard it, the careful control cracking, and that undoing, that fracture in her composure is the hottest thing I've ever heard in my life. Touch me, I whisper. Please, Lena, just touch me. I pressed harder. 2 fingers slipping down, pushing inside myself, and my hips came off the bed. A moan crawled up my throat, low, ragged, Lena's name tangled in it. I bit my lip. Tasted salt. My free hand fisted in the sheet. She doesn't tease. She gives me exactly what I asked for, her hand between my legs, those precise fingers finding me, and the sound she makes when she feels how wet I am is like nothing I've ever. Fuck Mira, she breathes, and her voice breaks on my name, and I want to live in that breaking. I want to cause it over and over. I want to be the reason Lena Ortiz loses control. My thumb circled my clit, fast now, pressure building like a tide, and my fingers curved inside myself, finding the spot that made my vision white out. The fantasy blurred. I couldn't hold the narrative anymore, it was just fragments. Her mouth, her hands, her voice saying fuck in that low, wrecked register, her fingers inside me, her eyes watching me come apart, those brown eyes behind the wire-rimmed glasses that had fogged in the greenhouse humidity. She watches me. She watches my face while she fucks me, and the way she looks at me, like I'm incredible, like I'm the most extraordinary thing she's ever seen, like I'm not too much and not too little but exactly precisely right. I came. Hard. Sudden. A sharp, full-body convulsion that bowed my spine and ripped a sound out of me that was loud enough to make Basil lift his head from the foot of the bed. My fingers didn't stop, couldn't stop, riding the aftershocks as they rolled through me, each one pulling another gasp, another clench, another tremor. Lena's name on my lips. Breathed into the dark room like a prayer to a god I'd just invented. Slowly, slowly, I came down. My hand stilled. My body sank into the mattress, boneless and buzzing, my heart beat a heavy liquid drum in my ears. The sheet was tangled around my legs. My t-shirt was rucked up to my ribs. The air was cool on my damp skin, and the rain was still falling, still drumming the glass, and everything smelled like the greenhouse and sweat and sex. I lay there. Stared at the ceiling. Caught my breath. Well, I said to no one. That happened. Basil put his head back down and went to sleep. Judgment rendered. I pulled the sheet up and turned on my side, pressing my face into the pillow. My body was loose and warm, the post-orgasm haze settling over me like a second blanket, and I should have felt satisfied. Mission accomplished. Tension released. System rebooted. Instead, I felt worse. Not guilty, I didn't do guilt about masturbation. Life was too short and orgasms were too important. But hollow. Because the fantasy had been so vivid, so detailed, so her, the focus, the competence, the way she'd look at me, that coming back to reality felt like stepping out of a warm room into cold air. I didn't just want to get off thinking about Lena Ortiz. I wanted the real thing. I wanted her actual hands, her actual mouth, her actual voice saying my name in that low, cracked way I'd imagined. I wanted to find out if she really kissed the way I thought she would. I wanted to know what sounds she made. I wanted to find out what happened when all that careful control came undone. And that was the terrifying part. Because this wasn't just attraction. I'd been attracted to people before. The barista at Grounds and Greens with the rolled-up sleeves, the woman at the farmer's market who sold artisanal honey, that one carpenter on TikTok who built shelves in a sports bra. Attraction was manageable. Attraction was a spark that you noted and moved past. This was a fire. And it had been burning since the moment she walked into my shop and looked at everything I'd built with those quiet, serious eyes, and I'd seen something in her face that I recognized, the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd been taking care of everything except themselves. I knew that look. I'd worn it. Val had put it on me, and I'd worn it for 2 years before I found the strength to take it off. And seeing it on Lena, competent, sharp, dry-humored Lena who showed up with pretzels and fixed my pipes and told me not to apologize for wanting her, made me want to do something I'd promised myself I'd never do again. It made me want to pour myself into someone else's cracks. You find wounded things and pour yourself into fixing them, Donnie had said. And the women never go as well as the plants. She was right. She was annoyingly, persistently, leather jacket-wearing right. I had a pattern. I saw someone hurting and I wanted to help, and I confused helping with loving, and I gave until I was empty and the other person was full, and they walked away without looking back because they'd never asked me to pour in the first place. But Lena hadn't asked. Lena wasn't asking for anything. Lena was the one who'd come downstairs with tools. Lena was the one doing the fixing. That was different. Wasn't it? I rolled onto my back again. The ceiling had no answers. The ceiling had water stains and peeling paint, and the faint brown ring of a leak that Lena had taped shut with steady hands and not a single wasted motion. My phone buzzed on the far side of the bed. I reached across, dislodging Basil again, sorry buddy, and looked at the screen. Lena, the tape is holding. No new drips. Your bucket is officially unemployed. I pressed the phone to my chest and grinned at the ceiling like an idiot. Then I typed back, because I had no self-preservation instinct whatsoever. Give the bucket a severance package. It served with honor. 3 dots. Then, I'll write it a letter of recommendation. Then a beat later. Good night, Mira. 2 words. My name from her keyboard on my screen. It shouldn't have meant anything. It was a standard sign-off. People said goodnight to each other all the time without it being a seismic event. But I read it twice. 3 times. Heard it in her voice, low and careful and warm, the way she'd said it at the door, the way she'd said you don't need to apologize without turning around. I put the phone down. Pulled the sheet to my chin. Basil crept back up and settled against my hip, purring, warm, alive. I'm in trouble, Ba, I whispered. Same thing I'd said 3 days ago, after she'd first walked into the shop. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. The rain kept falling. The greenhouse hummed. And somewhere above me, on the other side of old wood and copper pipes, Lena Ortiz was awake, and I was never going to sleep again. Chapter 5. Lena. Myra's mini-fridge died on a Tuesday. I knew this because she texted me a photo of it at 7:14 a.m., the fridge door hanging open, its interior dark and silent, a sad carton of oat milk sweating on the top shelf. The caption read, "Rip Gerald Jr. He lived a short and humid life. Cause of death, being a $90 appliance in a greenhouse." She'd named her mini-fridge. Of course she had. I texted back, I'll order a replacement. Should arrive Thursday. 3 dots. Then Thursday? Lena, I have perishables. I have yogurt. I have a very emotional block of cheese that cannot survive 2 days at room temperature. Emotional cheese? It's brie. Brie is inherently emotional. It's soft and French and it falls apart when you look at it wrong. I relate to brie on a spiritual level. I stared at my phone, fighting the twitch at the corner of my mouth that Mira Chen seemed to produce in me with alarming regularity. You can use my fridge, I typed, before the rational part of my brain could intercept. I barely have anything in it. A pause. Longer than usual. That's really nice of you. Thank you. No exclamation points. No emojis. No rapid-fire nervous chatter. Just quiet sincerity, and somehow that was worse than all the rest of it combined. We should probably coordinate groceries, I added, because I was a person who used the word coordinate, when what I meant was, I want to see you and I'm using dairy logistics as an excuse. No point buying duplicates. Lena Ortiz. Are you asking me to grocery shop with you? For efficiency. Ah. Efficiency. Very on brand. Is that a yes? That's a pick-me-up at noon and prepare for me to have opinions about produce. Which is how I ended up pushing a shopping cart through the fluorescent aisles of the Greenway Market on a Tuesday afternoon with Mira Chen, who, as promised, had opinions about produce. And dairy. And bread. And the fundamental nature of kale. I'm just saying, lacinato kale is objectively superior, she said, holding up a bunch of the dark crinkled leaves like a lawyer presenting evidence. She was wearing paint-stained overalls with a vintage Fleetwood Mac t-shirt underneath, her hair pinned back with a tortoiseshell clip, and she had a smudge of soil on her left cheekbone that she either didn't know about or didn't care about. Knowing Mira, both. It's more tender, it's better in soups, it's better raw, and it doesn't taste like you're eating a hedge. Who has opinions about kale? I asked, placing a bag of pre-washed spinach in the cart with deliberate calm. I have opinions about everything, Ortiz. Haven't you figured that out yet? I had. In the 5 days since I'd arrived, I'd learned that Mira had opinions about water filtration, reverse osmosis was overkill for civilians, about coffee roasts, medium dark or you were drinking bean water, about the correct way to load a dishwasher, there was a correct way, apparently, and I'd been doing it wrong for 34 years, and about the ethical implications of buying cut flowers. They're already dead, Lena, you're just buying a beautiful corpse. I'd also learned that she talked with her hands while pushing a grocery cart, which meant the cart had a tendency to drift toward displays of stacked cans like a shopping cart with a death wish. Watch the. I see it. She swerved at the last second, narrowly avoiding a pyramid of canned tomatoes. That was intentional. I was testing my reflexes. You were looking at the cheese section. The brie was calling to me. I told you, it's emotional. I took over cart-pushing duties. Mira walked beside me, tossing things in, a bag of fancy pasta, a jar of olives, 3 avocados she tested for ripeness with the focus of a surgeon assessing vitals. I removed 2 of the avocados and put back the olives. Those were good olives, she protested. Those were $9 olives. Quality has a price. So does rent, and you're behind on it. She clutched her chest. Low blow. I can't believe you'd use my financial vulnerability against me in the olive aisle. I'm using it against you in every aisle. That's the efficiency I mentioned. She laughed, that full head-back laugh that I was rapidly becoming addicted to, the one that made people in adjacent aisles look over and smile. Mira laughed like she meant it, like laughter was a physical act that required her whole body, and every time she did it, something in my chest expanded in a way that felt structurally unsound. We argued about bread. She wanted sourdough, I wanted whatever was cheapest. We compromised on a loaf from the bakery section that was neither. We argued about eggs, free range versus the ones that don't require a second mortgage. We did not argue about coffee, because she picked up the same medium dark roast I had in my apartment and raised an eyebrow at me, and I said nothing, because acknowledging that we had the same taste in coffee felt dangerously intimate in a way I wasn't prepared to unpack in the beverage aisle. At the checkout, she reached for her wallet, and I waved her off. I've got it. Lena? You can get the next one. She looked at me. That look she had, direct and searching, like she was reading fine print I didn't know I was displaying. You're assuming there's going to be a next one. Isn't there? A beat. Her eyes soft, the overhead lights catching something warm in them. Yeah, she said quietly. There is. The checkout kid scanned our groceries with the dead-eyed efficiency of someone making minimum wage and wishing they were literally anywhere else. Mira chatted with him anyway, asked about his day, complimented his earrings, made him crack a reluctant smile. She did that everywhere we went. left a trail of slightly happier strangers in her wake, like emotional pollination. We carried the bags outside. The rain had finally stopped, the first dry day in a week, and the sidewalk was washed clean, the air sharp and new. Mira tipped her face up to the watery sunlight and closed her eyes, and the light turned her skin golden and caught the curls escaping her clip, and I almost walked into a parking meter. "Cafe?" she asked, eyes still closed. "There's a place on the corner. They do a really good iced lavender oat latte." "That's not coffee. That's a dessert with an identity crisis." "Don't yuck my yum, Ortiz. You drink yours black like a serial killer. I drink mine black like an adult. Same thing." We dropped the groceries at the building and walked to the cafe, a tiny place called Grounds and Greens with exposed brick and a chalkboard menu and succulents on every table that Mira had supplied. She told me this as we walked in, pointing at each one. "That's a golem jade, that's a string of turtles. That one I propagated myself from a cutting I got at a swap meet in. Oh hi, can I get an iced lavender oat latte large?" The barista, a 20-something with impressive biceps and rolled-up flannel sleeves, knew Mira by name. Of course she did. "Hey Mira. The usual?" "You know me too well, Jordan. This is Lena. She's a micropause. She owns the building. She's new to the neighborhood." "Welcome." Jordan smiled at me. Professional. Warm. Definitely checking me out, though whether that was for herself or to assess me on Mira's behalf, I couldn't tell. "What can I get you?" "Black coffee. Whatever's fresh." "You're exciting," Mira said flatly. "I'm consistent." We sat at a small table by the window. The cafe was half empty in the afternoon lull, some ambient lo-fi thing playing over the speakers, sunlight striping the floor. Mira sat across from me and our knees bumped under the table. It was small, she was close, and neither of us adjusted to make more room. Jordan brought the drinks. Mira's was an architectural achievement, layers of purple and white in a tall glass, foam art on top, a sprig of actual lavender perched on the rim. She photographed it from 3 angles before taking a sip. My coffee arrived in a plain white mug. I appreciated its lack of theater. "So," Mira said, wrapping both hands around her glass. "Tell me something I don't know about you." "I'm left-handed." "Something interesting." "I'm a left-handed Aquarius." She kicked me gently under the table. "Come on. I showed you my plants, my home, and my bucket-based flood management system. I've revealed deeply personal information about my relationship with Bree. Give me something." I sipped my coffee. Considered. The thing about Mira was that she made me want to answer honestly, which was a new and alarming development for someone who'd spent the better part of a decade deflecting personal questions with sarcasm and subject changes. "I haven't lived anywhere longer than 14 months since I left for college," I said. 16 years. I just kept moving. New city, new apartment, new job. I told myself it was the industry, tech people move a lot, it's normal, but it wasn't that. What was it? I turned the mug in my hands. I think I was afraid that if I stayed somewhere long enough, I'd have to actually build a life. And building a life means caring about things you can lose. Mira was quiet for a moment. The lo-fi played. Someone ordered an espresso at the counter. "That's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me over coffee," she said. "Sorry. That was heavier than the vibe called for." "No. Don't do that, don't apologize for being real." She leaned forward, elbows on the table, and the movement brought her face closer to mine. "I like real. I've had enough performed and manufactured and carefully curated to last me a lifetime. Real is a relief." The air between us was doing that thing again, thickening, condensing, turning the 12 inches of cafe table into something charged and humming. Her eyes were so dark they were almost black in the afternoon light, and she was looking at me the way she'd looked at me in the greenhouse, like I was something she wanted to understand at the cellular level. I looked away first. I had to. Looking at Mira Chen for too long was like looking at the sun, I could feel it doing damage in real time, and I couldn't make myself care. She sat back, took a long sip of her lavender abomination. The tension didn't break, it just went ambient, background radiation, a hum in the walls. Okay, she said lighter now, sensing the shift and respecting it the way she respected everything instinctively. My turn. Something you don't know about me. You named your fridge. Something you don't already know. Okay. She twisted the lavender sprig between her fingers. I dropped out of college. Business degree. My parents still haven't forgiven me. What happened? I woke up one morning in my dorm room and realized I was building someone else's life. Every class, every internship, every resume bullet point, it was all for them. For my parents. For the version of me they needed me to be so they could tell their friends their daughter was successful. She shrugged, but it wasn't casual. So I left. Got a job at a garden center. Then a nursery. Then another nursery. Learned everything I could about plants and soil and how to make things grow. And 3 years ago, I walked into an empty storefront under a beautiful old building and thought, this is mine. Rose's building. Rose's building. She smiled. She sat with me for 2 hours the day I signed the lease. Brought empanadas. Told me the shop had been empty for 5 years and she'd been waiting for someone who'd treat it like a home, not a business. The smile wavered. I think about that a lot. Whether I'm living up to what she wanted. You are, I said, without hesitation, without calculation, without the careful filtering I usually applied to everything that came out of my mouth. The shop is exactly what she would have wanted. She would have loved you. Myra's eyes went bright. Not crying, just full. She blinked once hard and then grinned at me with that crooked, dimpled, devastating grin. You're going to make me emotional in a cafe, Ortiz. I have a reputation to maintain. What reputation? Chaotic but chill. Messy but fun. Definitely not the kind of person who cries over coffee because her hot landlord said something nice about her dead friend. She'd said it casually, tossed it into the sentence like seasoning, but the word landed on the table between us like a grenade with the pin pulled. Hot landlord. You keep doing that, I said. Doing what? Calling me things and then pretending you didn't. Her cheeks flushed. That warm, visible flush that bloomed across her brown skin like watercolor. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never called you anything. I've been the picture of professionalism. I'm practically in a blazer right now. You're in overalls with a paint stain on the knee. Professional overalls. You called pipe repair sexy 2 days ago. We agreed never to speak of that. We agreed to nothing. I have it in my memory permanently. Your memory is faulty. I'm going to need you to defrag, or whatever it is you computer people do. I was smiling. I could feel it, a real one, not the ghost of a smile twitch that was my default, but the full thing, pulling at muscles that had apparently atrophied from disuse. Mira noticed. Her gaze dropped to my mouth and stayed there for a beat too long before snapping back up. You should do that more, she said, softer. Do what? Smile. You have a really good one. It changes your whole face. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with any of this, the warmth pooling in my chest, the gravitational pull of the woman across the table, the fact that I'd known her less than a week and she already knew things about me that people I'd dated for months had never gotten close to. So I deflected. Drink your flower juice. We should get back before the groceries warm up. It's a lavender oat latte, and it's delicious and you're a coward for not trying it. I'm a pragmatist. Same thing. She finished her drink, scraped the foam from the glass with her straw like a heathen, and we left. Walking back to the building, she bumped her shoulder against my arm, on purpose I was pretty sure, and left it there for a few steps before drifting away. The point of contact burned through my hoodie like a brand. We were half a block from the building when it happened. Mira was talking, gesturing with her free hand about a customer who'd come in asking if she sold plant food that would also work on my lawn, when her foot caught the edge of a raised sidewalk slab. She stumbled forward, and the iced latte she'd gotten to go, a second one, because apparently one lavender abomination wasn't enough, left her hand in a graceful arc and landed directly on her chest. Purple-white liquid exploded across her t-shirt, soaking it instantly from collar to navel. "Oh fuck!" She staggered, caught her balance, and looked down at herself with an expression of pure offended disbelief. "Oh come on! Come on!" That was a vintage Fleetwood Mac shirt. That was from the Rumors tour. That was... She pulled the soaked fabric away from her skin. "That's cold. That's very cold. Oh God, it's in my bra. Are you okay?" "I'm wet, and I'm devastated, and I think the lavender is going to stain." She was standing on the sidewalk, arms held out from her sides, dripping purple milk onto the concrete, and she looked so genuinely affronted, not at the fall, not at the cold, but at the insult to the shirt, that I did something I hadn't planned. I reached over and pressed a napkin to her collarbone. My hand was on her. My fingers on the napkin on her skin, just below the hollow of her throat, where the lavender milk was sliding down in a thin rivulet. The fabric of her t-shirt was soaked and translucent, clinging to the curve of her collarbone, the strap of her bra visible underneath, dark green against brown skin, and I was close enough to see the goosebumps rising on her chest from the cold. I dabbed. Gently. The way you'd tend to something delicate. Mira had gone completely still. The frenetic energy that was her default state, the talking, the gesturing, the constant motion, all of it stopped. She stood on the sidewalk, arms at her sides, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not nervous. Not joking. Not deflecting. Open. Her eyes were wide. Her lips were parted. The pulse in her throat was visible, rapid, a flutter beneath the skin where my fingers almost touched. I was aware, with painful clarity, that we were on a public sidewalk. That my hand was on her chest. That I was wiping lavender milk off a woman I'd known for 5 days, while the entire neighborhood went about its Tuesday afternoon around us. I pulled back. Folded the napkin. Shoved it in my pocket. "Let's get you inside," I said. My voice sounded almost normal. Almost. We walked the last half-block in silence, the charged kind, the kind that hummed like a live wire. I could feel her next to me, feel the heat of her despite the cold wet shirt, feel the weight of the look she'd given me on the sidewalk. That openness. That stillness. Mira, who was never still, standing motionless under my hand. Inside the building foyer, she stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "I can't go through the shop like this," she said, looking down at herself. The shirt was clinging to her in a way that left essentially nothing to the imagination. The shape of her sports bra, the softness of her stomach, the curve of her waist, where the overalls sat low on her hips. "I've got a customer pickup in 20 minutes, and I can't greet them looking like a Jackson Pollock painting." "I can throw it in with my laundry," I said. "I was going to do a load tonight anyway." "You do that?" "It's a washing machine, Mira, not a marriage proposal." She grinned. And then she reached for the hem of her t-shirt and pulled it off. Right there. In the stairwell. 6 feet from the mailboxes. She peeled the soaked fabric over her head in one smooth motion, wrung it out with a twist of her wrists, and held it out to me. Her hair was mussed from the collar, curls sticking up, and she was standing in her overalls and a dark green sports bra that cut across her chest in a way that... Her shoulders. Her collarbones. The soft swell of her breasts above the bra's edge, still glistening with drops of lavender milk. The flat plane of her stomach, the slight concavity below her navel where the overalls hung low. The curve of muscle in her arms, not sculpted, just strong, the kind of functional strength that came from hauling 50-pound bags of soil upstairs. There were freckles on her shoulders. I hadn't known that. A scatter of them, like someone had flicked a paintbrush across her skin. She was holding the shirt out to me. I was not taking it. I was standing in the stairwell of my grandmother's building, holding 2 bags of groceries, staring at my half-naked tenant like I'd been hit in the head. Lena. She waggled the shirt. Her expression was innocent. Her eyes were not. The shirt? I took it. Our fingers didn't touch this time. She made sure of that, dropping it into my hand with a precise release that left an inch of air between us. Deliberate. Controlled. A very clear, very calculated your move. Thanks, she said. Casual. Like she was wearing a parka, and not standing in a stairwell in her bra. You're a lifesaver. She pulled up the loose overall strap, fastened it, and it covered approximately nothing, the bra still visible between the straps, the sides of her torso exposed. She turned to head back to the shop entrance. Paused. Looked over her shoulder. For the record, she said, echoing my words from 2 nights ago with a precision that told me she'd been holding on to them, turning them over, waiting for the right moment to give them back. You don't need to apologize for staring. And then she was gone. Through the front door, into the shop, the bell chiming behind her, and I was alone in the stairwell, holding a wet Fleetwood Mac t-shirt and 2 bags of groceries, and the absolute wreckage of my composure. I climbed the stairs. Unlocked my apartment. Put the groceries away with mechanical precision, dairy on the top shelf, produce in the drawer, the emotional brie in its designated spot. Then I stood at the kitchen counter, with Myra's shirt in my hands. It was still warm. Damp and cold on the outside, but warm underneath where it had been against her skin. It smelled like lavender milk and fabric softener, and under that, the scent I was starting to recognize as uniquely hers, green and warm and faintly sweet, like the greenhouse distilled into something human. I brought the shirt to my face. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself, in the specific and unambiguous language of a woman who knew her own weaknesses, that I would not stand in my kitchen and smell my tenant's shirt like some kind of touch-starved lunatic. I held it against my face and breathed in. Then I folded it, put it in the washing machine with my own clothes, and turned the dial to cold wash because I wasn't a complete animal. But I stood there for a long moment after, hands braced on the machine, head down, eyes closed. My heart was doing something arrhythmic and unsustainable. My skin was prickling everywhere Myra's eyes had touched me, which was everywhere, because she looked at me the way she looked at her plants, like I was something alive that deserved attention, that might respond to care, that might bloom under the right conditions if someone just bothered to show up consistently and pay attention. Nobody had looked at me like that in years. You don't need to apologize for staring. She'd given my line back to me. Weaponized it. Smiled over her shoulder while she did it, still wet, still half-dressed, still the most disruptive force I'd encountered since a syntax error took down a production server on a Friday at 5 p.m. The washing machine hummed to life. Her shirt tumbled in the drum with my clothes, and there was something about that, her things and my things, tangled together in the warm water, that felt like a metaphor I wasn't ready to examine. I sat at my laptop. Opened the lease file for Fern Flicker. Stared at the numbers. From below, muffled by the floor, I heard her voice, bright and warm, greeting a customer. Welcome to Fern Flicker. Can I help you find something? We've got a sale on Pothos. I closed the laptop. I pulled out my phone and opened the text thread. Your shirt is in the wash. Should be done in an hour. The response was immediate, you're the best. What setting did you use? Cold wash. Gentle cycle. You use the gentle cycle? For my ratty old band tee? It's vintage. You said it was from the Rumors tour. A pause. Longer than usual. Lena. What? That might be the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done with my laundry. It's a washing machine setting, Mira. It's not about the setting. It's about the fact that you listened when I said it mattered. I stared at the message. Read it twice. Felt something crack along a fault line I hadn't known existed. I listen, I typed. I know you do. That's the problem. How is listening a problem? 3 dots. Appearing. Disappearing. Appearing again. Because it makes me want to tell you everything. I set the phone down, pressed my palms flat on the table, took a breath that didn't steady anything. The washing machine hummed. The building settled. And somewhere below me, Mira Chen was selling plants and smiling at strangers and being the warmest, messiest, most alive thing in a building full of old pipes and creaking wood, and a woman on the second floor who was falling, slowly, inevitably, the way water finds its way through every crack, for the person on the other side of the ceiling. The gentle cycle ran for 52 minutes. I know, because I counted every one. Chapter 6. Mira. The week after the coffee incident was the best week the shop had ever had. A local blogger, queer in the city, 30,000 followers, the kind of curated lifestyle account where everything looked effortless and nothing was, had come in on Wednesday to buy a monstera for a photo shoot. She'd stayed for 2 hours. She'd talked to me about propagation techniques and the queer community board and the drag queen plant naming contest I was planning for Pride Month. She'd taken 60 photos, tagged the shop in every one, and by Thursday morning, Fern Flicker had gained 400 Instagram followers and a line out the door. I sold more plants in 3 days than I had in the entire previous month. The String of Pearls display sold out. The Calathea collection, even the dramatic ones, flew off the shelves. I had to put in an emergency order with my wholesaler, who sounded genuinely confused by the volume. You usually order 40 units. You want 400? The internet found me, Dave. Send the plants. By Friday, I was running on adrenaline and 3 hours of sleep, and the kind of giddy, disbelieving joy that happens when something you built with your bare hands suddenly gets seen by the world. I restocked shelves, answered DMs, did 2 impromptu Plant Care 101 sessions for groups of women who'd driven in from neighboring towns, and sold a custom terrarium to a couple who wanted something gay and mossy for their anniversary. Donnie was working double shifts. Even Mrs. Pock came down to help, manning the register with the serene authority of someone who'd been running things long before any of us were born. Lena had quietly updated the shop's Google listing with better photos and SEO keywords, something I only discovered when I noticed the listing had jumped from 4 reviews to 26 overnight. Did you do this? I texted her with a screenshot. You were busy. I had time. Lena, you optimized my search results. It took 20 minutes. That's the hottest thing anyone has ever done for my small business. Please stop calling everything I do hot. I will not. The week was good. The week was great. The week was the kind of evidence I usually pointed to when my brain tried to tell me I was a fraud who got lucky and would eventually be exposed as a woman who just liked playing in dirt. And then on Saturday morning, Val texted. I was in the greenhouse, repotting a bird of paradise that had outgrown its container, hands deep in soil, Stevie Nicks playing on the Bluetooth speaker, when my phone buzzed on the potting bench. I glanced at it with dirty fingers, expecting Donnie or a customer or Lena sending me another dry, devastating text about water pressure or building codes that somehow made my stomach flip. The name on the screen was Valentina Torres. I hadn't deleted her number. I should have. Donnie had told me to. My therapist had told me to, the self-help book I'd read twice and failed to internalize had told me to. But there was something about deleting a number that felt like admitting the person had power over you, like the act of removing them proved they were still taking up space. So I'd kept it, buried in my contacts, a landmine I stepped around without thinking about. Until it went off. Saw the article about your shop. Cute little place. Proud of you. 7 words. 12 syllables if you counted. Approximately 0 genuine sentiment. I knew what she was doing. I'd spent 2 years learning the vocabulary of Val's particular brand of cruelty, the kind that dressed itself in compliments and concern and the plausible deniability of I was just being supportive. Cute little place. Not incredible shop you built from nothing. Not thriving business that hundreds of people drove hours to visit this week. Cute. Little. Diminutives. the linguistic equivalent of patting someone on the head. And proud of you. As if she had any right. As if her pride was something I'd been working toward. As if the entire point of Fern Flicker, the blood and sweat and terror and 3 years of barely making rent, had been to earn a 2-word validation from a woman who'd once told me, during a fight about dishes, that my little plant hobby was sweet but not exactly a career. I set the phone face down on the bench. Went back to the bird of paradise. My hands were steady. My chest was not. The thing about Val was that she didn't need to be in the room to take up all the air. She could do it from a distance, a text, a voicemail, a casual mention from a mutual friend, and suddenly I was 27 again, sitting on the floor of our apartment, apologizing for having feelings that inconvenienced her. We'd been together for 2 years. From the outside it looked fine. Val was smart, successful, beautiful, a marketing director at a firm downtown, the kind of woman who wore blazers without irony and always knew the right wine to order. She was charming in public, attentive in front of friends. She remembered birthdays and anniversaries and the names of everyone's pets. In private, she was something else. Not violent. Never that. Val's weapons were subtler: silence, dismissal, the slow, systematic erosion of every belief I held about my own worth. She didn't yell. She sighed. She didn't criticize. She corrected. She didn't forbid me from doing things. She just made it clear, through 1,000 micro-expressions and carefully worded observations, that the things I wanted were silly, my dreams were impractical, and my emotions were a burden she was generously tolerating. "You're a lot, Mira." She used to say it with a smile, like it was a compliment. Like being a lot was something cute and manageable, a personality quirk she'd chosen to find endearing rather than a fundamental part of who I was. I'd believed her. For 2 years I'd believed that I was too much, too loud, too messy, too emotional, too invested in things that didn't matter. I'd made myself smaller, inch by inch, like a plant in a pot that was too tight, roots circling back on themselves, growth stunted until I couldn't remember what shape I was supposed to be. When I finally left, it wasn't dramatic. I woke up one morning, looked at the woman sleeping next to me, and thought, I don't like who I am when I'm with you. That was it. No screaming match, no affair, no single devastating betrayal. Just the quiet realization that I'd been slowly disappearing, and the only way to come back was to leave. The shop came after. Fern Flicker was my recovery project, a place to put all the care and attention I'd been wasting on someone who didn't want it. Every shelf I built, every plant I nursed back from the clearance rack, every customer I helped find the right succulent for their bathroom, it was me, rebuilding myself pot by pot. And now Val was texting me about it. Cute little place. Like she was reviewing a restaurant she'd visited once and found adequate. I finished the bird of paradise. Watered it. Checked the roots. Moved it to its new spot by the greenhouse window. Mechanical, precise, my hands doing the work while my brain did something else entirely. I picked up the phone. Read the text again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Thank you, I typed. Deleted it. Fuck off, I typed. Deleted it. It's not cute. It's a thriving business that I built from nothing while recovering from the emotional wreckage of loving you. And if you ever text me again, I'll... Deleted it. I put the phone down. My hands were shaking. Not with anger, with the specific, full-body vibration of someone whose nervous system had just been activated by an old threat, like hearing a car backfire and dropping to the ground. My body remembered Val before my brain could override it. The shop bell chimed. A customer. I wiped my hands on my overalls, fixed my face into something that approximated cheerful, and went out front. The afternoon was busy enough to distract me. I sold plants. I answered questions. I recommended a pothos to a college student who said, I want something that won't die even if I forget it exists for 2 weeks, and I said pothos. The golden retriever of the plant world. Loyal, forgiving, impossible to kill. She laughed. I laughed. Everything was fine. Except it wasn't, because between customers, in the quiet moments when the shop was empty and the fairy lights buzzed and Gerald stood in the corner judging me with his fiddle-leaf fig energy, I kept pulling up Val's text and rereading it like it was a code I could crack if I just stared at it long enough. Proud of you. Why did those words feel like a leash? Why, after 3 years, after therapy, after rebuilding my entire life from the soil up, could 2 words from Valentina Torres reduce me to the version of myself I'd spent every day since leaving her trying to outgrow? At 5 p.m., I flipped the sign to closed. At 5:15, I stress ate half a block of brie standing at the kitchenette counter. At 5:30, I texted Donnie. Val texted me. Donnie, what did she say? Me, saw the article about your shop. Cute little place. Proud of you. Donnie, I'll kill her. Me, that's not helpful. Donnie, it would solve the problem permanently. Me, Donnie. Donnie, fine. How are you doing? Me, I'm fine. Donnie, try again. I put the phone down. Picked it up. Me, I feel small. I had the best week the shop has ever had, and one text made me feel like none of it counts. Donnie, that's the point. That's what she does. She waits until you're up, and then she reminds you she's still in your head. It's a power move. Me, I know that intellectually. Donnie, but? Me, but my body doesn't know it intellectually. My body wants to apologize for being successful in a way that caught her attention. Donnie, I'm coming over tonight. Don't argue. I argued. She came anyway. But that was at 11 p.m. Between 5:30 and 11, I did what I always did when the feelings got too big. I worked. I cleaned the shop from top to bottom. Swept, mopped, wiped every shelf, polished the reclaimed wood counter until it gleamed. I reorganized the propagation trays by species. I trimmed dead leaves from every plant in the greenhouse, which took 2 hours because I had over 300 plants and I was being thorough to the point of obsession. At some point, Lena texted, "Everything okay down there? Sounds like you're rearranging furniture." I stared at the message. My fingers were dirty, my eyes were stinging, and my chest felt like someone had their hand inside it, squeezing at irregular intervals. All good. I typed back. Just doing some reorganizing. You know me, chaos incarnate. Exclamation points. Emoji. The Mira Chen public relations strategy. If you perform happiness convincingly enough, sometimes you trick yourself into feeling it. She didn't respond for a minute. Then you sure? 2 words. Not pushing. Not pulling. Just leaving the door open, the way she left her balcony door open on warm nights, an invitation that didn't demand acceptance. Yeah, I typed. Promise. I wasn't sure. And it wasn't a promise I could keep. But I wasn't ready to tell Lena about Val, about the 2 years of careful destruction, about the version of me that had existed before the shop, about the way one text from the right person could undo months of work like pulling a thread from a sweater. I wasn't ready because telling Lena about Val meant showing her the broken parts. And I was terrified, bone-deep, stomach-churning terrified, that if Lena saw the broken parts, she'd do the math and decide I wasn't worth the maintenance. Because that's what Val taught me. That my damage was a burden. That needing things made me needy. That the cracks in me were defects, not features, and anyone who got close enough to see them would eventually decide the repair costs outweighed the value. I knew it wasn't true. My therapist had spent 18 months helping me understand that it wasn't true. But knowing something and feeling it were different languages, and some days like today, the knowing was in English and the feeling was in a tongue I'd never learned to speak. By 9 p.m., I'd cleaned everything there was to clean. The shop was spotless. The greenhouse was pristine. I was standing in the back room, staring at my collection of ceramic pots, and I made a decision that I recognized, even as I made it, as a cry for help disguised as productivity. I started repotting. Not the plants that needed it. All of them. One by one, I pulled plants from their pots, shook out the root balls, inspected them, and resettled them into new soil. It was unnecessary, most of them were perfectly happy where they were, but the rhythm of it was soothing. Hands in dirt. Roots exposed and then covered. The quiet, repetitive act of giving something a fresh start. I was on my 14th repotting, a cactus named Steve who definitely did not need a new home, but was getting one anyway, when Donnie pushed through the back door at 11:07 p.m. She was still in her tattoo shop clothes, black tank top, black jeans, her wildflower sleeve on full display, her short dark hair spiked up from running her hands through it. She took one look at me, kneeling on the greenhouse floor, surrounded by empty pots and mounds of soil, elbow deep in a cactus repotting that had no earthly justification, and leaned against the doorframe. "How many?" she asked. 14. "In how many hours?" 5. "Give or take." "Mira. Don't. You've repotted Steve. Steve is a cactus. Cacti like being root-bound. You are performing unnecessary surgery on a cactus because your ex sent you a text message, and if that's not a cry for help, I don't know what is." I looked down at Steve. He stared back at me with the impassive judgment of a plant that had done nothing to deserve this level of attention. "He seemed stressed," I said weakly. "Babe?" Donnie crouched next to me. She smelled like the tattoo shop, green soap and ink and the faint ozone of the autoclave, and her face was soft in the way it only got when she was worried. "Talk to me." I sat back on my heels. Soil on my knees, under my nails, smudged across my forehead. The greenhouse hummed around us, the dehumidifier, the drip system, the faint rustle of leaves. The fairy lights made everything amber and warm and unbearably gentle. "I had the best week of my professional life," I said. "The blog post. The sales. The followers. People drove hours to come here, Donnie. People told me the shop made them feel seen. A woman cried at the register because she said she'd never been in a plant shop with a pride flag in the window. That's incredible. It is incredible." And then Val texted and I pressed my dirty hands to my thighs. I felt like it didn't count. Like none of it counted. Like she was the real authority and her verdict was cute little place, and that was the truth and everything else was just me playing pretend. Donnie was quiet. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fix. She just sat on the greenhouse floor with me and let the words come. "I hate that she still does this to me," I said. "I hate that I gave her this much power. I haven't spoken to her in a year, and one condescending text, and I'm repotting cacti at 11 o'clock at night because I don't know what else to do with the feeling. The feeling is valid. The feeling sucks. Both things can be true." Donnie picked up a pot, turned it over in her hands. "You know what I think? That I should delete her number. That you should delete her number, yes, but also, I think you're scared because this week proved that the shop is real. That it matters. That you built something that people love." And when Val texted, it wasn't just her being shitty. It was a reminder that the last time you had something real, someone told you it was small. I felt the words land in my chest like a stone in still water, the ripples spreading outward, touching everything. "And now there's Lena," Donnie added carefully. "Don't. I'm not saying anything. You're implying. I'm observing." She set the pot down. "You've been glowing this week, and it's not just the blog post. You glow differently when you've been texting her. I can see it from across the shop. So I'm going to say this with love. Be careful about building something with someone new when Val is still rattling the cage. Nothing is built. Lena and it's not." Donnie looked at me. "Okay, it's something," I admitted. "But it's early. And it's complicated. And I don't even know if she optimized your Google listing. That's not. She used the gentle cycle on your vintage tea. How do you know about that? You told me. Twice. Both times with the expression of a woman who was emotionally compromised by laundry." Donnie stood up, brushed soil off her jeans. I'm not saying don't pursue it. I'm saying deal with the Val stuff. Not for Lena. For you. Because you deserve to walk into something good without dragging the ghost of someone who made you small. She was right. She was always right. It was deeply annoying. For the record, I said, Steve didn't need to be repotted. I know, babe. I owe him an apology. Write him a card. She pulled me up from the floor and hugged me, a Donnie hug, which was brief and fierce and involved her lifting me slightly off the ground because she could. Then she made me tea, sat with me while I drank it, and didn't leave until I promised to delete Val's text. I did, and text my therapist about scheduling an extra session. I also did. After Donnie left, I showered, changed into clean clothes, sat on my bed with Basil in my lap. The building was quiet. It was past midnight, and even Lena's faint presence above me had gone still. No keyboard tapping, no chair scraping, no footsteps on hardwood. She was asleep. Or at least in bed. The thought of Lena in bed was not one I was going to entertain right now, because I had used up my entire emotional bandwidth for the day and had nothing left for yearning. I picked up my phone, opened Val's text thread one more time. Saw the article about your shop. Cute little place. Proud of you. I read it. Let it sit in my chest one final time. Felt the weight of it, the condescension, the possessiveness, the quiet assertion that she was still the authority on my worth. Then I deleted the thread. Not the number. Not yet. But the thread. The words. The evidence that she'd reached into my best week and tried to make it smaller. I set the phone on the floor. Pulled the blanket up. Basil curled against my side, purring his broken motor purr. Through the greenhouse glass, the fairy lights glowed. Through the ceiling, Lena slept. 2 things I'd built. 2 things that were mine. 2 things that Val couldn't touch because they existed in a world she'd never bothered to understand. A world made of soil and glass and the steady, patient work of growing something from nothing. Cute little place. No. Not cute. Not little. Mine. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I'd be better. Tomorrow, I'd be the version of myself that the shop deserved and the customers loved and Lena looked at with those quiet, serious eyes. Tomorrow, I'd be Mira Chen, foliage overlord, queer plant whisperer, disaster-prone business owner who'd built something real from the ruins of something false. But tonight, I was just tired. And that was allowed too. Chapter 7. Lena. Something was wrong with Mira. I couldn't prove it. She was still texting me, bright, chatty, emoji-laden messages about plant deliveries and broken shelf brackets and the ongoing saga of a customer who kept returning pothos because they didn't match her aura. She was still playing her music, still talking to her plants, still showing up at my door with a coffee and a question about the building's hot water schedule. But something had shifted. A dimming, barely perceptible, like a bulb on a slow-dying filament. The exclamation points in her texts felt deliberate rather than natural. Her laughter, when I heard it through the floor, had an edge I hadn't noticed before, performative, like she was generating the expected response rather than feeling it. I noticed because, and this was the part that disturbed me, I'd apparently been studying Mira Chen with the same attention I gave critical infrastructure. I knew her rhythms. I knew the baseline. And this was a deviation. On Saturday night, I'd asked if she was okay. She'd said all good, with an exclamation point that felt like a locked door. On Sunday, she'd reorganized the shop's entire propagation system. I could hear her moving shelves until nearly midnight. On Monday, she'd sold more plants than any previous day, according to the sales tracker she'd shown me. I'd helped her set up a spreadsheet. She'd called it the sexiest Excel document in horticultural history, and then she'd gone silent for 3 hours, which was unprecedented for a woman who could not go 3 minutes without narrating her own life. I didn't push. Pushing wasn't my style, and it wasn't what she needed. I left the door open and waited, and I hated waiting, but I was learning that some things, code, pipe fittings, Mira Chen, couldn't be forced into resolution on my timeline. By Tuesday, she'd leveled out. The texts regained their natural chaos. The laughter lost its edge. Whatever had happened, she'd weathered it. I'd been there, not helpful, not intrusive, just present, and she'd come out the other side. Which should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning of a different problem entirely. Because somewhere in the process of monitoring Mira's emotional state with the precision of a system administrator watching server logs, I'd crossed a line I hadn't seen coming. I cared. Not in the abstract, responsible landlord way I'd been pretending. Not in the she's a nice person and I hope she's okay way that normal people cared about their neighbors. I cared in the way that made me check my phone every time it buzzed, hoping it was her. In the way that made me leave the balcony door open every evening, not for the air, but for the sound of her voice. In the way that made me lie awake at night, staring at my grandmother's ceiling, thinking about the strip of skin above Mira's waistband, and the freckles on her shoulders, and the way she'd stood in the stairwell in her sports bra and looked at me like she was daring me to want her. I hadn't been dared. I hadn't needed to be. I'd been wanting her since the first night, looking down through the greenhouse glass, watching her talk to plants like they could hear her. The wanting had just been quiet. Background noise. An ambient hum I could tune out while I focused on the responsible, practical, boundary-respecting business of being her landlord. It wasn't quiet anymore. It was Tuesday. 11 p.m. I was in bed, Abuela Rose's bed, which I'd finally started thinking of as mine after putting on new sheets and rearranging the pillows, a small but significant act of ownership that Mira would have approved of. My laptop was open on my thighs, the screen showing lines of code I'd been staring at for 40 minutes without writing a single useful thing. The balcony door was open. Of course it was. Below me, the greenhouse glowed. The fairy lights were on, they were always on at night, a warm amber haze that bled up through the floor and the walls and turned my bedroom ceiling into a faintly golden sky. And through the open balcony door, carried on the humid air, I could hear Mira. She was doing her end-of-day routine. I knew the sequence by now. 2 weeks of proximity had turned her schedule into something I could track by sound alone. First the watering, the gentle rush of the hose, the soft patter of water hitting soil and leaves. Then the pruning, the quiet snip of shears, the rustle of discarded foliage. Then the arranging, the scrape of pots on shelves, the occasional muttered commentary, "No, you go there. Don't argue with me. I'm the one with opposable thumbs." I closed my laptop. Set it on the nightstand. Told myself I was just going to close the balcony door and go to sleep. I got up and walked to the balcony instead. The night was warm for the first time in weeks. The rain had finally broken, replaced by a soft, humid stillness that felt like the city exhaling. I stepped onto the narrow balcony, bare feet on the warm wood, and looked down. Through the greenhouse glass, she moved. She was wearing a tank top tonight, one of the thin strapped ones that showed off her shoulders and the tops of her arms. Her hair was damp, freshly washed, curling tight against her head. She moved between the plant rows with her usual fluid efficiency, but slower tonight, more languid, like she was savoring the routine rather than powering through it. She reached up to adjust a hanging basket, and her tank top rode up. The strip of brown skin above her waistband, that strip, the one I'd been thinking about since the first night, appeared and disappeared as she moved. Her overalls were unbuckled on one side, hanging loose, the strap trailing, and the tank top was damp at the small of her back where the greenhouse humidity stuck fabric to skin. She set the basket in place and stretched. Arms over her head, fingers interlaced, spine arching. That sound, the groan, the uninhibited full-body release, drifted up through the glass and the warm air and hit me directly in the chest. Then she did something I hadn't seen before. She pulled the tank top away from her skin, fanning it, trying to cool down. When that didn't work, she grabbed the greenhouse hose, the one she used for watering, attached to a spray nozzle, and misted her own face and neck. The water caught the fairy lights as it fell, turning into momentary gold, and she tipped her head back and let it run down her throat, her collarbones, the V of her tank top. She laughed. Alone, in her greenhouse at 11 p.m., spraying herself with a garden hose like a kid in a sprinkler. The sound was bright and uncalculated and completely free, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd heard in years. I went back inside, closed the balcony door, drew the curtain, stood in my bedroom with my back against the glass and my hands pressed flat to the door behind me and breathed through my teeth. Get it together, Ortiz. I couldn't get it together. That was becoming increasingly clear. Every system I'd built to manage this, the avoidance, the deflection, the strict internal categorization of Mira Chen as tenant, neighbor, acquaintance, do not touch, was failing. Not gradually. Catastrophically. The kind of cascading failure that happened when you ignored too many warnings for too long and the whole architecture gave way at once. I got back in bed, pulled the sheet up, stared at the ceiling. Her laugh was still in my ears. The arch of her spine. The water on her throat. The freckles on her shoulders that I'd memorized in the stairwell, that I'd been thinking about every night since, that I wanted to map with my mouth, like plotting coordinates on a grid. I pressed my palms to my eyes. My glasses were on the nightstand, and without them the room was soft-edged, impressionistic, shapes without definition, light without source. It felt safer that way. Less precise. I was so tired of being precise. My hand moved. Not a decision. Not a conscious choice. Just my hand sliding from my face down the center of my body, palm flat against my sternum, my stomach, the waistband of the boxers I slept in. A slow, heavy drift, like gravity had redirected itself, and the only direction that existed was down. I stopped. Fingers resting on the elastic. The responsible, boundary-respecting part of my brain issued a formal objection. I overrode it. My hand slipped beneath the waistband. The first touch of my own fingers between my legs sent a shudder through me, not because it was unfamiliar, but because the charge behind it was so acute, so concentrated, that the sensation was almost sharp. I was already wet. Had been, maybe, since the balcony. Since the sound of her stretch. Since the water on her throat. I closed my eyes. I didn't construct a scenario. That wasn't how my brain worked. Mira might have fantasized in narratives, scenes, staging, dialogue, but I thought in fragments. In data points. In sensory inputs cataloged and replayed with photographic fidelity. Her arms. The muscle definition when she lifted the hanging basket. The way her forearms flexed, the veins just visible under the skin. My fingers moved slowly. I didn't rush this, I never did. Patience was the only thing I was good at, the only skill that transferred from code to body, and tonight I needed it. I needed to take this apart piece by piece, to feel every thread of it, because the thing building inside me was enormous, and I wanted to understand its architecture before it demolished me. Her shoulders. The freckles. 5 on the left, 3 on the right. The smooth brown skin between the overall straps and the sports bra, still glistening with lavender milk, and the absolute devastation of her looking at me over her shoulder and saying, "You don't need to apologize for staring." I circled my clit with 2 fingers. Slow. Steady. My hips lifted off the mattress, and I pressed them back down, maintaining control, though the control was mostly theater at this point, a performance for an audience of none. My breathing had shifted. Deeper. Measured. The kind of deliberate breathing I used to manage panic attacks, now repurposed entirely. Her voice. The way she said my name, Lena, with that specific emphasis on the first syllable, a little higher than the rest, like it surprised her every time. Like my name was a thing she enjoyed the shape of. Like she was turning it over in her mouth and finding she liked the taste. I thought about her mouth. Full lips. The crooked smile. The dimple on the left side that appeared and disappeared like a secret. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on something. Repotting, reading a label, looking at me when she thought I wouldn't notice. I thought about kissing her. What it would be like to finally close the distance that had been shrinking between us since the first day. To put my hand on the back of her neck and feel the short curls against my fingers and pull her in. to find out if she tasted like the lavender lattes she drank, or the greenhouse air she breathed, or something else entirely. Something I couldn't imagine because I hadn't had the data yet, and I wanted the data so badly I was shaking. My fingers pressed harder. Faster. The slow, careful rhythm cracking as the images sharpened and the heat concentrated into a single, unbearable point. Her hands. Small, callous, strong. The way she talked with them, wild, expansive, dangerous to nearby shelf displays. The way they'd feel on my skin. On my ribs. On my breasts. Her palm flat against my stomach, sliding down, her fingers finding me the way she found the pulse point on a plant. Instinctive, precise, alive to every signal. Her body against mine. In the back room, behind the greenhouse wall, my back pressed to the brick and her mouth on my neck and her hand between my legs, and the sound she'd make, God, the sound she'd make. She'd talk. Of course she'd talk. She talked during everything. She'd tell me what she wanted, tell me what she was doing, narrate her own desire in that breathless, rapid-fire voice. You feel so good, right there. Don't stop, Lena, please don't stop. My back arched. I bit down on the inside of my forearm to keep quiet, an old habit, an apartment living habit, and bitterly appropriate tonight because the woman I was thinking about was directly below me, separated by nothing but old wood and air and the fragile fiction that this was something I could control. She'd say my name. The way she always says it, that little lift, that emphasis, but wrecked now, broken open, my name in her mouth while my fingers are inside her. I came. It hit like a system crash, total instant whiteout. My body locked, every muscle rigid, and the sound I made was muffled against my forearm, but would have been loud enough to hear through the floor if I hadn't caught it. Wave after wave, my hips grinding against my own hand, my other arm pressed to my face, my breath trapped somewhere in my chest where it burned and refused to release. The aftershocks rolled through me for a long time. Longer than usual. Each one pulling a tremor from deeper in my body, like the orgasm was excavating something I'd buried a long time ago, and the unearthing was messy and overwhelming and not entirely physical. I lay still afterward. Hands still between my legs, arms still across my face, breathing hard. The room was dark and quiet. Through the closed balcony door, I could hear the faintest strains of music, Myra's end-of-night playlist, something low and dreamy that she played while she shut down the greenhouse for the evening. I moved my arm from my face. Stared at the ceiling. I hadn't done that, hadn't let myself do that in a long time. Not the masturbation. The specificity. Thinking about a real person, someone I knew, someone whose voice I could hear through the floor. Every fantasy I'd had in the past 3 years had been abstract, faceless, nameless, purely mechanical. A physical maintenance task, like stretching or drinking water. Efficient. Detached. Utterly devoid of the thing I'd just felt, which was the opposite of detached. Which was so attached, it felt like falling. My last girlfriend, Sarah, the one who'd called me emotionally unavailable, the one who'd been right, had once said, during our final argument, that being with me was like sleeping next to a locked safe. She could hear something moving inside it, could tell there was something valuable in there, but she'd never been given the combination and eventually stopped trying. I'd let her say it. I'd agreed even in the flat, affectless way that proved her point. And after she left, I'd added another lock to the safe and told myself it was for the best. Mira was not trying to crack the safe. She wasn't trying to do anything. She was just existing, laughing, talking, spraying herself with a garden hose at 11 p.m., being fully and unapologetically alive, and the locks were opening on their own, one by one, as if they'd been waiting for a specific combination and her frequency matched. I hadn't felt this in years. I hadn't felt this, maybe, ever. Not this particular cocktail of terror and desire, and the vertiginous sense of standing at the edge of something that would either save me or ruin me, and being unable to tell the difference. I pulled my hand free, rolled onto my side, pressed my face into the pillow, which smelled like the laundry detergent I'd started buying because Mira mentioned she liked the scent, a fact I was choosing not to examine. Below me, the music changed. Something with piano. Something that sounded like it belonged in a room with candlelight and bare skin, and someone else's breath on your neck. I closed my eyes. 3 facts undeniable. 1. I was falling for Mira Chen. Not slowly. Not gracefully. The way you fall when you miss a step in the dark, sudden, total, too late to catch yourself. 2. She was my tenant. I was her landlord. The power dynamic was real and non-trivial, and pretending otherwise was the kind of irresponsible self-delusion I'd spent my entire professional life building systems to prevent. 3. None of that was going to stop me. The locks were already open. The safe was empty. Whatever I'd been protecting in there had already escaped, and it was downstairs, talking to a fiddle-leaf fig named Gerald, and wearing succulent print boxers, and laughing at her own jokes in a greenhouse full of fairy lights. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it without thinking. Mira, the jade you took home is sprouting a new leaf. I think she likes you. Then I named her. She's Lena Jr. I hope you don't mind. Then, is it weird that I named a plant after you? Then it's weird. Forget I said anything. Good night. Then wait, don't forget. She's really cute. The leaf is tiny. I'll show you tomorrow. 5 texts in 90 seconds. Quintessential Mira. A burst of vulnerability followed immediately by an attempt to retract it, followed by the inability to actually retract it because she meant every word and she was constitutionally incapable of hiding what she felt. I typed back, it's not weird. Show me tomorrow. Then after a beat, good night, Mira. I set the phone down, pressed my hand to my chest, where my heart was doing something that felt less like beating and more like reaching. The music below faded. The greenhouse lights dimmed. The building settled into its nighttime sounds, the creak of old wood, the distant hum of the dehumidifier, the not-quite silence that was actually Mira, breathing and existing and sleeping 20 feet below me in her narrow bed. She'd named a plant after me. A new leaf. Tiny. Growing toward the light. I pulled the blanket up. Closed my eyes. Let the last of the tension drain from my body into the mattress and the old springs that had held my grandmother and now held me. Tomorrow I'd see Mira. Tomorrow I'd look at her and know what I'd done tonight, what I'd imagined, what I'd called out in the dark. She'd show me the jade plant, and she'd smile that crooked, dimpled smile, and she'd stand too close, and my body would remember everything my brain was trying to forget. And I'd let it. Because the alternative, locking it back up, adding another layer, pretending I didn't want her with every malfunctioning cell in my carefully guarded body, was no longer an option I could choose. The safe was open. There was no closing it now.
She's lying in bed, pressing her face into the pillow, grinning like someone who lost a fight she'd been winning for weeks. The greenhouse is humming below her. Lena is 20 feet above her, on the other side of old wood and copper pipe. Their lips were a breath apart. Mira whispered, "I've been trying not to do this." And a cat named Basil destroyed a $40 pot and everything else. The almost kiss is still in the air, like a scent that won't fade. And Mira has made a decision. She is going to kiss Lena Ortiz, Basil or no Basil. What happens next? The Plant Shop Next Door by Aurora North, available now in ebook and audiobook. Links in the description. And if you want the scene that was too explicit for retail, the greenhouse, the blindfold, the flannel shirt, the bonus chapter is free on our website, also linked below. This has been Fractal Enigma Audio Previews. See you next time!